Hey guys, tonight we ease into the heat and haze of 1970s Bangkok, where the air smells like lemongrass, cigarette ash, and something more elusive, danger wrapped in silk. You're standing near Yaowarat Road, under red lanterns swaying from balconies older than the Cold War. Below them, street vendors call out in Cantonese and Thai, while in a narrow alley thick with incense smoke, a man known only as Sai Baa whispers orders that ripple through the entire heroin trade of Southeast Asia. They say he never touched a gun, never had to. His weapon was knowing who needed what, and who was desperate enough to pay in more than money. Somewhere between the sacred and the profane, the opium routes of the Golden Triangle bent in his direction. And if you ever saw his face, you probably shouldn't have. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is on your side of the world. I always love seeing our sleepy little global map light up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fan turns lazily in a third-story room above a shuttered apothecary. The streets of Chinatown are quieter after 2 a.m., but not empty. This is when real business happens. Sai Baa sits in a rattan chair with one slipper off, one on. He doesn't look like a kingpin, more like a retired tailor. But 5 blocks away, a shipment of Burmese heroin is being unpacked inside boxes labeled as dried squid, and 6 people are waiting for his silent nod. He doesn't speak unless necessary. His phone, the kind with a rotary dial and too many scratches, rarely rings. Instead, couriers arrive with small envelopes, pink ones always, and kneel before handing them over. Inside, numbers, names, and sometimes a single flower petal. Sai Baa burns the papers after reading them. No copies, no notes. Everything he needs stays behind those heavy-lidded eyes. He wasn't always this composed. The origin of Sai Baa is a patchwork of facts and rumors, depending on who you ask in Bangkok. Most agree he came from Ayutthaya, born poor, the son of a canal fisherman and a laundress. His real name? Long forgotten. Sai Baa is a street name, meaning something like dry breeze. It fit him, they say, because he passed through chaos untouched. He started small, collecting gambling debts, running messages between tea houses. But he listened, not just to the words people said, but to the rhythms beneath them. Who hesitated before speaking? Who glanced sideways before answering? That's how he built his map, not of Bangkok's roads, but of its power grid, the unseen one, the one with no electricity but plenty of shock. One night in 1966, he helped smuggle a wounded man out of a police sting near Lumpini Park. The man had a gunshot in his thigh and a satchel full of raw opium. Sai Baa carried him 3 kilometers through back alleys, paid off a pharmacist, and kept him alive. That man later became the head of a northern militia supplying heroin by the ton. Sai Baa never asked for repayment. He never had to. By 1970, his name moved through Bangkok like smoke, never quite solid, but always in the room. Every major opium deal had his fingerprint somewhere, a phone call, a meeting, a message delivered in a Cantonese opera fan, and yet no photograph of him had surfaced. Not one. Police reports listed him as unknown male, Thai-Chinese origin, approx. 5'6". He wasn't flashy, no gold chains, no Tiger Balm cologne. He dressed like a government clerk. His luxury was discretion. Once, when asked by a loud-mouthed smuggler from Phuket why he didn't drive a Mercedes, Sai Baa replied, "Why carry a sign that says, 'Rob me slowly'?" His office wasn't even an office. It was that tiny room above the apothecary. One desk, one fan, one lamp, and a low stool for guests. The only decoration was a faded photo of King Rama IX and a single jade elephant. Yet from this quiet command post, roots formed, roads that led from the poppy fields of Burma, through northern Thailand, across rivers, onto trucks, and finally into the pockets of suited men in Singapore, Sydney, and sometimes Saigon. One mainstream fact: in 1971, U.S. President Richard Nixon launched his War on Drugs, heavily focusing on heroin entering from Southeast Asia. But even as DEA agents landed in Bangkok, Sai Baa remained untouched. Why? Because the agents didn't speak the language, not just Thai, but the language of favors, face, and silence. Sai Baa was fluent. The most curious thing is, he never physically touched the heroin, not once. At least, according to every single person who worked with him. Many people still think that he managed an empire worth millions without ever being caught on tape, arrested, or even described in accurate detail. So what do you think? Was he just that good? Or was someone protecting him? Under the fan, he shifts his slipperless foot and pours 2 cups of oolong. One is for the courier who's coming up the stairs. She's 17, dresses like a student, and carries her messages in a hollowed-out textbook. When she opens the door, she doesn't speak. She bows. Sai Baa gestures toward the tea. In 5 minutes, she'll leave with 3 names, a time, and a scent to wear that signals who she's working for. That scent? Clove and jasmine. Nobody in the trade wears it, except his people. And if you smell it in a tea house today, there's a slim chance you're standing on one of his old trails. Do you remember the pink envelopes? They'll come back later, but tonight, they're folded inside a pocket, tucked beside a key to a boat engine that won't start unless tapped in just the right place. Sai Baa knows these little details. He hoards them like gold, not because he's paranoid, but because in Bangkok, survival depends on what you don't say. He listens as the girl walks down the steps. Her pace is quick, but not hurried. She's been trained. Outside, a tuk-tuk idles. Inside, the fan turns once more, wobbling slightly. And Sai Baa reaches for the next envelope, sliding his nail beneath the flap like it's a lotus blooming. The monk stands barefoot in the sun, one palm stretched forward for alms, the other clutching a polished wooden begging bowl. He is an old man, stooped and smiling, with robes that smell of camphor and smoke. No one would guess that tucked beneath the saffron folds is a sliver of paper with 5 digits, scribbled in pencil by someone who never went to school, but who now moves 100,000 baht every week. Sai Baa watches from a distance, sipping black coffee through a straw. The heat warps the air. In the shade of the temple's eaves, 2 boys pretend to sweep leaves while tracking the monk's movement with narrowed eyes. They're not temple apprentices. They're runners. Sai Baa's runners. The monk, affectionately called Luang Po by locals, is more than just an unwitting courier. He's a bridge. Somewhere along the line, Sai Baa discovered that customs officers and border patrols rarely, if ever, searched monks. Sacred cloth made for a perfect shield, and so the game changed. You didn't hide heroin in crates or rice bags. You hid information, movement orders, bank codes, in the folds of the holy. The genius of it wasn't just the camouflage, it was the deniability. Luang Pho truly believed he was just carrying prayers. The boys would switch the paper while offering coins, sleight of hand, nothing more. And when the old man stepped onto the 10:15 riverboat heading north toward Ayutthaya, No one gave him a second glance. Inside the boat, he sat cross-legged, eyes closed, mumbling chants while children fed pigeons on deck. But 3 seats away, a woman with a cigarette burn on her forearm watched every blink, every gesture. She knew what he carried, and more importantly, who waited for it on the other end. Sai Baa had trained his network with rituals, not just what to do, but when and how slowly, and in what shoes. He knew that in Thailand, memory and rhythm mattered more than logic. If the monk always walked the same path, at the same hour, wearing the same sandals, then people stopped noticing. And when people stop noticing, you can move almost anything. One such package had passed through that temple 3 days ago, tucked inside the hollowed base of a statue of Ganesh. It was sealed in wax and hidden behind a panel in the altar. Sai Baa had personally instructed the craftsman. "Make it so even the gods won't feel the difference," he'd said, not entirely joking. Mainstream history tells us that in the early 1970s, the heroin trade in Southeast Asia was booming. The Golden Triangle, where the borders of Thailand, Laos, and Burma meet, became one of the largest opium-producing regions in the world. What most textbooks skip is how smugglers like Sai Baa turned temples, monks, and even funerals into perfect conduits. No one looks into a coffin when there are tears. Luang Pho's temple was modest, just outside the tourist routes, close enough to be ignored. Sai Baa had once donated to repair its roof, not out of guilt, but out of strategy. The abbot owed him a favor. Everyone owed Sai Baa a favor eventually. That was the trap. That afternoon, the girl with the gold bracelet met the monk at a noodle stand on the other side of the river. Her name was Juan. She looked like a high schooler, but her eyes were cold. She poured chili vinegar into her soup without blinking, and waited until Luang Po blessed her with a splash of holy water from his silver bowl. Under the splash, the monk slipped a tiny cloth pouch into her palm, so smooth it looked like part of the ritual. Juan bowed deeply, pressed her palms together, and turned without a word. Somewhere across Bangkok, a man was being held in a concrete room, his hands bound with electrical tape, waiting for the ransom details that were hidden in that pouch. Sai Baa had approved the kidnapping, though, as usual, he wouldn't profit directly. But the gang needed his blessing to avoid complications. Without Sai Baa's name, things tended to go wrong. Sai Baa didn't condone violence, not publicly, but he understood it. His rule was simple: never harm the innocent. But if someone played dirty, all bets were off. Juan took a motorcycle taxi toward Dusit. The monk climbed back onto the riverboat. By dusk, both had vanished into the pulse of Bangkok. Back in his third-floor room, Sai Baa poured water over a red orchid and waited. He rarely gave orders in person. But tonight, there was something he needed to see with his own eyes. At 9 p.m., a boy named Jit arrived, barefoot, nervous, and smelling of fried bananas. He handed Sai Baa a crumpled piece of newspaper with one corner circled in blue ink. Inside the circle was an ad for a laundry shop, but the letters were misaligned. That was the code. It meant pickup confirmed. Delivery failed. Sai Baa said nothing. He just nodded, then turned the page and used it to swat a mosquito. Somewhere, someone had gotten too clever. Many people still think that Sai Baa was a puppet master of strings too tangled to trace. But here's the thing. He didn't need puppets. He had believers. Everyone in his orbit thought they were doing the right thing. Even the monk. Especially the monk. So what do you think? Can a man like Sai Baa operate without touching a single gram of heroin? Or is that just what people told themselves so they could sleep? That night, a new monk arrived at the temple, taller, younger, with a Bangkok accent. He would replace Luang Pho for a while, who had decided, curiously, to take a sudden pilgrimage to Chiang Mai. No one questioned it. But 2 nights later, a customs checkpoint near Mae Sai found an abandoned riverboat with no passengers, just a saffron robe neatly folded on the deck. Back in Chinatown, Sai Baa lit a coil of incense and watched the smoke twist upward like a question no one had answered. The fan overhead turned slower now. Outside, someone played an old Thai pop song on a crackling radio. And the city, as always, kept whispering his name without daring to say it aloud. The air up north tastes different. It's thinner, drier, laced with wood smoke and sap. In Chiang Mai, the mountains press in closer, and the neon signs of Bangkok give way to paper lanterns and teak walls. Sai Baa steps off the slow train with a canvas bag and no expression. He's not here to sightsee, though if you asked the local station master, he'd say the quiet man in brown slacks was here to buy silk for his wife's birthday. Silk was code, of course. By 1972, Sai Baa's roots had grown too big for Bangkok alone. The city had become crowded, with tourists, with spies, and with a growing number of journalists sniffing around the so-called Golden Triangle. So he pivoted, northward, toward the hills where the real product started its life. You've probably heard of the Golden Triangle. If you haven't, it's that infamous jungle junction where Thailand, Burma, now Myanmar, and Laos meet. During the 1970s, it was ground zero for the global heroin trade. But behind the maps and documentaries, there were people like Sai Baa, quiet fixers who never showed up in the spotlight but made sure the light stayed on behind the curtain. He didn't go into the jungle himself, of course not. But he had tea with the men who did. That afternoon, in a dusty tea house near the edge of the night bazaar, he met a Hmong trader named Leng. Leng was squat, wore a denim jacket despite the heat, and spoke in riddles, the kind of man who would tell you the weather by how his pigs slept the night before. But he controlled 5 hill tribes who each grew opium in secret valleys, and that made him important. They sat under a whirring ceiling fan, smaller than Sai Baa's own, but no less hypnotic. The waiter brought out sticky rice and fried pork skins, which Sai Baa ignored. Instead, he passed Leng a folded piece of newspaper marked with only one item, an ad for school shoes with a tiny red dot above the O. Leng smiled. The deal was done. They say Sai Baa could read a man's greed the way some read fortunes in tea leaves. He offered Leng not just cash, but protection, a route that would bypass the corrupt militia checkpoints and instead move the product through rivers disguised as fish sauce shipments. Fish sauce is pungent, oily, and always sealed. No one likes to inspect it closely. Sai Baa had bribed 3 customs men and 1 Catholic missionary to guarantee the route. That last one? A Canadian who thought he was delivering medical supplies to clinics. Whether Sai Baa lied to him or the missionary simply chose to look away remains a mystery. Many people still think that those clergy-run medical stations in Laos were quietly complicit, but no one has ever proven it. So, what do you think? Was it faith or fear? Back at the tea house, Leng's son brought over a burlap sack filled with unprocessed poppy resin, sticky, dark, fragrant. Sai Baa didn't touch it. He simply nodded and placed a small jade Buddha on the table. It was his way of saying, "Thank you. But also, I know where you live." Sai Baa didn't use threats. He used reminders. Later that night, he checked into a guest house with no signage. His room overlooked a banana grove. The only other guest was a Belgian backpacker who smelled of incense and wanderlust. They nodded at each other once and never spoke again. At dawn, Sai Baa rose early and walked through the morning mist toward a small pagoda. Not to pray, though he bowed like everyone else. Instead, he knelt beside an old woman selling amulets. She handed him a white envelope hidden beneath a stack of cheap wooden pendants. Inside, an update from a contact in Tachi Lake, just across the Burmese border. The route had cleared. The first shipment would cross on Monday, under tarps loaded with star anise and dried shiitake mushrooms. On his way back, Sai Baa passed a group of Western tourists photographing a monk giving alms. They laughed loudly, unaware that one of the men squatting beside the monk was a runner carrying a false-bottom basket filled with rolled maps, each marked with faint charcoal trails, routes snaking down through valleys, forests, across rivers, into warehouses that bore no names. Sai Baa paused. He always paused, because Chiang Mai wasn't just a detour, it was a reminder. The farther you got from the noise of the capital, the more the truth spoke in whispers. Here, opium wasn't some abstract horror. It was a crop, grown by hands, dried on rooftops, hidden in gourds, smuggled with lullabies. He returned to Bangkok the next day, but his mind stayed up north. The new route would cut 2 days off the old journey and avoid the checkpoints where the Royal Thai Army sometimes sniffed around for bribes. More importantly, it would allow movement during the festival months, when fireworks masked engine sounds and monks traveled more frequently, creating the perfect camouflage. There was one hiccup. A boy in Pai had been caught bragging. 16 years old, addicted to the status more than the product, he had mentioned Sai Baa's name in a card game. 2 days later, he was found asleep by the river, permanently asleep. No marks, no violence, just a pack of cards in his hand and a whisper that maybe, just maybe, Sai Baa didn't tolerate carelessness. Even now, nobody's sure if he ordered the boy's death. It's possible the hill tribes handled it themselves, out of respect or fear or both. But the timing was suspicious. The message was clear. Sai Baa returned to his rattan chair. Same fan, same view of the alley. But now, in the drawer beside him, sat a scrap of cloth dyed with opium resin. A reminder that everything began up north, with a flower that bloomed in misty hills, far from the noise. As night fell, he lit a cigarette. The smell was rich, earthy. He didn't inhale. He just liked the way the smoke curled, rising into the dark like a secret trying to escape. The plane came in low over the Mekong, its propellers coughing against the humidity. It was a patched-together Cessna, paint flaking, landing gear reluctant. But it landed just fine on the dirt strip outside Nong Khai, raising a cloud of dust that settled quickly and quietly. Inside the cockpit sat a man with aviator sunglasses, a crooked tooth, and a hangover older than the war he once flew in. His name was Jack, just Jack. He used to fly for the U.S. Air Force. Now he flew for whoever paid him in cash, bourbon, or, on occasion, stories. He never asked questions, never opened crates. And that was exactly why Sai Baa liked him. Jack met Sai Baa in 1970 under strange circumstances, over a broken fan and a spilled whiskey bottle at a bar where the waitresses wore fake Chanel and the music never stopped playing. Jack had been grounded for the week. Something about papers that didn't line up. Sai Baa, seated alone at the corner booth, simply passed him a matchbook with an address and a time. Jack showed up. That's how their arrangement began. No contracts, no middlemen, just a quiet understanding. Jack would fly where told, carry what he was handed, and never look inside. In return, Sai Baa made sure Jack never lacked for visas, spare parts, or loose envelopes stuffed into coat pockets. By 1973, Jack was flying monthly for him, sometimes between northern Thai villages, other times across borders so subtle they didn't exist on most maps. And when the heroin needed to move faster than the roads allowed, Jack was the man. This flight, though, was delicate. He was picking up 4 crates labeled medical instruments from a dirt airstrip near Mae Hong Son. The crates were packed with vials wrapped in cloth and straw, carefully arranged to mimic the rattle and heft of glass syringes. But inside, pure number 4 heroin, refined, potent, ready to be repackaged in Bangkok's quieter alleys. Sai Baa didn't meet him at the landing strip. That wasn't his style. Instead, a woman in a green ao dai met Jack at the edge of the field. She handed him a thermos of iced tea and a receipt written in Chinese characters. Jack didn't read Chinese. He didn't need to. He just winked, took the tea, and helped load the crates into his plane. Many people still think that pilots like Jack were rogue, operating outside any system. But the truth is fuzzier. During the Cold War, Southeast Asia was a chessboard of overlapping interests. CIA agents, drug runners, revolutionaries, and priests often crossed paths, and sometimes traded favors. So what do you think? Was Jack working for Sai Baa? Or for someone else too? In Bangkok, Sai Baa waited. He already knew the flight would land safely. Jack had flown trickier routes with worse cargo. But this shipment mattered more than most. It was the first using a new refinement method, a process developed quietly in a Shan lab with help from a rogue chemist formerly employed by the French military. Heroin that pure traveled further, sold higher, and attracted more risk. Still, it was elegant stuff, powdered like sugar, nearly scentless. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you might mistake it for flour. Back in his room, Sai Baa opened his notebook, not to write, but to review. The pages were blank. They always were. He kept his records in his head, arranged like a marketplace. Names, weights, routes, debts. He could recall what he paid a Laotian fixer 3 years ago on a rainy Tuesday, and how many steps it took from that man's front porch to the barrel of pickled fish where the real documents were stored. The crates arrived by nightfall, loaded onto a borrowed bakery truck. They passed through 3 police checkpoints with no issue. A small envelope had been tucked into each officer's lunchbox that morning, just a polite reminder not to be curious. Bangkok ran on gestures. The truck stopped behind a dim-lit karaoke bar in Thonburi. From there, 2 men, one with a stutter, one who always whistled, carried the crates down into a basement where a false wall opened to reveal Sai Baa's hidden processing room. This wasn't a factory, it was a sanctum. 1 red light, 1 scale, 1 fan buzzing softly. The men unpacked the vials. Sai Baa supervised from a wooden chair, sipping hot tea with slices of ginger. He never raised his voice, just pointed. 1 nod meant continue. 2 meant pause. A slow blink? That meant something had gone very wrong. That night, everything went right. The heroin was pure. The measurements exact. The distribution mapped out like constellations. 10% to a dockside crew near Pattaya, 15 to a nightclub owner in Singapore, 20 to a courier with airline connections. And the rest? Stored away, buried, literally, beneath the tiled floor of a dentist's office that hadn't seen a patient in years. A mainstream fact. In 1973, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, was formally established. Its agents soon flooded Southeast Asia, setting up embassies and tightening surveillance. But despite the heat, Sai Baa never even had his photo on a wanted list. No one could agree on what he looked like. Some said he had a mustache. Others swore he was bald. Many believed he didn't exist at all. Later, Jack returned to the bar in Bangkok. Same booth, same broken fan. This time, Sai Baa joined him. They sat together in silence, nursing tea and cheap whiskey. A slow jazz tune drifted from the radio. When Jack reached for his glass, he paused. "What's this batch called?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. Sai Baa looked up, amused. "Cloud," Jack laughed. "Fitting." And then the fan above them creaked again, as if in agreement. They sat like that for a long while. Two men from different worlds, sharing the same air, the same code of silence. Outside, the rain began to fall, soaking the neon signs and washing the streets clean, at least on the surface. Inside the crates, now emptied, only rice husks remained. The warehouse smelled like damp rice and rusted metal. It sat 3 blocks from the Chao Phraya River, wedged between a motorbike repair shop and a chicken feed distributor. From the outside, it looked abandoned, its windows shuttered, its doors warped. But if you arrived on a certain day, at a certain hour, and knocked 3 times on the dented tin sheet near the side door, the lock would click open, and the world inside would change. Inside were sacks, dozens of them, each labeled in Thai script, Khao Khao 100%, white rice, 100% pure. But inside, they carried something more profitable and far more dangerous. Heroin, yes, but hidden in a way so clever, so simple, that even trained sniffer dogs didn't pick up a thing. Sai Baa had outdone himself this time. He called it the Jasmine method. Take a high-grade rice sack, hollow it gently from the inside, reinforce it with a second lining, fill the center with shrink-wrapped bricks of heroin, reseal the seam with rice grains glued precisely back into place. From the outside, nothing but a sack of perfectly normal export-grade rice. Smelled like it, moved like it, weighed like it. Even customs officers would crack open a few sacks, see the grains, and wave the shipment through with a yawn. That's how the Bangkok warehouse became a silent artery in a global operation. The rice was real. It was just in the way. It all started, funnily enough, with a chef. Back in '72, a Chinese Thai cook named Uncle Po had smuggled duck meat across the river in hollowed-out bags of flour to dodge tariff taxes. Sai Baa heard the story, invited Uncle Po to dinner, and 3 bowls of congee. Later, he asked, "What if the flour wasn't flour?" The chef chuckled. "Then it had better not clump when I throw it." 2 months later, they had a prototype. 4, actually. The 5th burst open mid-transport and coated a very surprised driver in powder that wasn't quite edible. Lesson learned. By 1973, the method was perfected. Each sack was loaded onto cargo trucks, then slipped into legitimate shipments heading to Singapore, Taipei, and more daringly, into American military bases where Thai contractors handled supply runs. No one questioned rice. Thailand was one of the world's biggest exporters. It would be odd if there wasn't rice moving through the system, a mainstream fact. By the mid-1970s, heroin from Southeast Asia accounted for a huge percentage of the global supply. Some estimates placed it as high as 70%. Much of it moved through Thailand, hidden under the noses of both local authorities and international watchdogs. But the brilliance wasn't just in volume. It was in invisibility. And Sai Baa made invisibility his art form. Inside the warehouse, he moved like a teacher during an exam. He didn't bark orders. He observed. He corrected. If a stitch looked too tight, he raised a brow. If a seam left a telltale ripple, he pressed it flat with the heel of his hand. Each packer knew their role, and each knew the consequence of failure. Not death, disgrace. That's what set Sai Baa apart from the others. He didn't operate on fear. He operated on pride. The people in his orbit believed they were part of something elegant, something far above the crude brutality of back alley dealers. Sai Baa's world was closer to ballet than crime, and like all ballets, the beauty hid the pain. Still, mistakes happened. One morning, a dock worker noticed something odd. A rat had chewed through one of the sacks awaiting shipment. The rice spilled out, white and clean, but at the very center, a faint glint of vacuum wrap peeked through the grains. The man froze. He looked once, twice, then zipped the bag closed and said nothing. That night, he found an envelope under his motorbike seat. Inside, a voucher for a weekend in Hua Hin, a wad of cash, and a note that read, "Everyone needs a holiday." He never spoke of the sack again. Many people still think that Sai Baa used violence to silence leaks, but the truth is more nuanced. He used kindness, targeted, unnerving kindness. Because when someone gives you a holiday instead of a bullet, you begin to wonder just how closely they're watching. So what do you think? Is mercy more frightening when it comes from someone who never raises their voice? Back in his upstairs room, Sai Baa reviewed the week's shipments. He used a mnemonic system tied to Buddhist sutras. Each client was associated with a verse. Each verse encoded weights, quantities, and timing. To anyone else, it looked like a man rereading scripture. But in Sai Baa's mind, he was tracking 27 metric tons of movement across 4 continents. His fan turned overhead, slower now. One blade had begun to wobble. He made a mental note to call the repairman, but not tonight. Tonight, he was expecting a visitor. At precisely 8:35 p.m., the bell rang from below. 3 soft taps. He descended the stairs, opened the back door, and found a woman in a flower print blouse holding a bag of steamed buns. She smiled politely. He returned the gesture, then invited her in. She wasn't a courier. She wasn't a packer. She was from the customs office, and she was here for rice, not metaphorically. She had a request. Her sister's wedding was next week, and the family wanted the highest quality jasmine rice possible. She'd heard Sai Baa knew someone. He poured tea. She sat cross-legged on the floor. Their conversation drifted from family to food, to Bangkok's terrible summer heat. Not once did she mention the real reason for her visit. That was the dance. After she left, Sai Baa placed a fresh order for 2 sacks, real rice, no tricks, delivered to her home by a boy who claimed to be her cousin's friend. Inside one of the sacks, a smaller sack. Inside that, a silver bracelet she'd once admired in a shop window months earlier. She never asked how he knew, but from that point on, Sai Baa's shipments flowed more freely through port inspections. Back at the warehouse, the workers finished packing for the night. The last sack was sewn tight, sealed with glue made from tapioca and ash, and loaded onto a truck marked for Chiang Rai. The engine turned over, the headlights flicked on, and somewhere, under that fragrant cargo, history hummed softly in powdered form, ready to cross borders, pass through hands, and vanish again. The envelope was pink, always pink. No return address, no name, just a soft fold and a wax seal shaped like a camellia. Inside, written in meticulous Thai script, were 11 digits and 1 time. The numbers never repeated, and they always meant something very specific. A date, a weight, a price, a name. If you had to ask what they meant, the letter wasn't meant for you. That morning, the envelope arrived by bicycle. The courier was a schoolgirl in a white blouse and navy skirt. Her socks were clean. Her face was unreadable. She parked the bicycle outside a noodle stall, adjusted her pigtails, and slid the envelope beneath a stack of old Thai Wrath newspapers. Then she left. The The stall owner, a man with 3 teeth and a perpetual scowl, made no move to retrieve it. He finished his cigarette, cursed at the radio, and flipped a fish ball in boiling broth. 5 minutes later, a monk walked past, paused, and picked up the envelope without breaking stride. The noodle man didn't look up. That envelope would travel across 6 hands before reaching Sai Baa. Along the way, each hand memorized its contents, committed them to neural fire, and destroyed the paper. The last man, the one with a limp and a fondness for fermented shrimp paste, recited the numbers aloud in front of Sai Baa, then burned the paper inside an old brass teacup. Sai Baa listened without blinking. Then he blew gently on the ashes, scattering them like incense dust across his bamboo floor. The envelope had told him a shipment from the Shan States had been intercepted 3 hours ago at a checkpoint near the Thai-Myanmar border. Soldiers had seized the truck, detained the driver, and radioed headquarters in Chiang Mai, but they hadn't opened the crates yet. That gave Sai Baa exactly 2 hours. He pulled out a worn map of northern Thailand. The paper crackled as he unfolded it. Using a short pencil sharpened with a knife, he circled a junction near Phong, where 2 roads split. One toward Chiangdao, the other toward a dead-end village. Then he picked up the phone. This phone wasn't the one most couriers called. It was hidden inside a dusty cabinet that once held ceremonial fans. The line was private, direct, used only in moments of smoke and blood. He dialed 4 rings, a cough on the other end, then a voice. Yes, Sai Baa? Sai Baa said one word, rooster. That was it. 10 minutes later, a man in Chiangdao got on a bicycle and began pedaling like his life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. The rooster protocol was one of Sai Baa's oldest fail-safes. It was built for moments like this, when a route collapsed, a border tightened, or a plan crumpled before the first cigarette could burn halfway. Here's how it worked. One man, stationed near the trouble zone, would deliver a decoy shipment, a real one, into the hands of military officials. But this shipment was tainted, impure heroin, overcut, sticky with chemical burn. It would cause panic, finger-pointing, disarray. The soldiers would think they'd caught the motherlode, and while they argued over who to blame for the product's poor quality, the real shipment, traveling in an ox cart with bananas, would take the forest trail 3 kilometers south. Every time the rooster crowed, someone lost a truck. Yes, but the real payload never stopped moving. Back in Bangkok, Sai Baa watched the clock. He didn't pace. He didn't sweat. But he moved his tea to the left side of the table, a habit he only had when waiting for results. 47 minutes later, the phone rang once. He picked up. A man simply said, "Cart past the tree with 3 roots." Sai Baa hung up. "Do you remember the tree with 3 roots?" It stood just outside the checkpoint, growing sideways from a cliff wall, gnarled and ancient. Sai Baa had named it during a trip years ago, when a teenage boy and his crew vomited on it during his first smuggling run. Since then, it had become a code word, a landmark, and a kind of superstitious guardian. If a shipment made it past the 3-root tree, it was safe. This one had passed. Still, the decoy driver was in custody. Sai Baa made another call, this time to a police official in Chiang Mai, whose nephew he had once saved from expulsion at a military academy. He requested a delay in interrogation, just an hour. Enough time for the driver to memorize a pre-written confession about acting alone and discovering the drugs hidden in his truck by accident. The police official agreed. In return, he asked for a favor: a rare cognac, hard to find in Thailand. Sai Baa made a note and passed the request to a Singaporean contact. The bottle would arrive within a week. That's how his world worked. Small favors, quiet gifts, delays disguised as generosity. Nobody owed him outright, but everyone owed him slightly. That was enough. A mainstream historical fact. During the 1970s, Thailand's internal policing was deeply fragmented. Military, border patrol, narcotics division, provincial police, each operated semi-independently. This disorganization made it easier for syndicates like Sai Baa's to weave through the cracks. A bribe in one department didn't trickle down to the next, so you had to know who was in charge that day and who their cousin had just married. Sai Baa knew all of it. Many people still think that running drugs was about brute logistics, routes, crates, transport. But that's only half true. The other half was theater. Layers of masks, knowing who had a mistress, who needed tuition money, who feared losing face. So what do you think? Is it possible to control an empire without a single soldier, just by knowing everyone's secret? Back in his room, Sai Baa removed a pink envelope from a locked drawer. It wasn't for delivery. It was one of the few he kept. Inside were the original 11 digits. The first code ever sent to him from a northern opium farm. Back before his name meant anything to anyone, he kept it not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. Every empire begins with one message, and tonight, as the fan creaked overhead and the city hummed with motorbikes and monsoon steam, the man called Sai Baa smiled faintly. Another shipment moved, another soldier stayed quiet, and Bangkok, wrapped in shadows, slept on. At the border, nothing ever sleeps. Sai Baa knew this, where Thailand kissed Laos in a haze of river mist and suspicion. Small shacks doubled as inspection posts, and wooden barriers posed as deterrents. But the real conversations didn't happen at checkpoints. They happened under tin roofs, where cheap whiskey was poured in teacups, and officers played cards with merchants who carried nothing but silence in their carts. That's where the money went, and where it stayed. It was 1974. The heroin trade had matured like a silent lung infection, spreading through lungs, governments, borders. But it still relied on frictionless crossing points, and those were increasingly hard to guarantee. The Americans were asking questions. The Laotians were growing paranoid. The Burmese were splitting into factions, and nobody knew who controlled what anymore. Sai Baa didn't need to know who controlled the border. He only needed to know who thought they did, so he paid them all. His strategy was elegant in its cynicism. Don't bribe up the chain, bribe across it. A sergeant's nephew, a gatekeeper's mistress, a cousin who handled the diesel supply. Bribes that weren't bribes, wedding gifts, school fees, a bag of imported coffee left anonymously outside someone's door. He had a name for these payments, the quiet guns, because in this world, bullets weren't what kept you safe. It was courtesy, timing, knowing that Sergeant Noom had a toothache and couldn't risk a scuffle before his dental appointment. That Private Ek liked a certain Chinese cigarette brand and would allow 2 extra minutes of inspection if the scent lingered on the incoming driver. That week, 2 tons of heroin were scheduled to pass through a cluster of huts near the Thai-Laos border. Packed in crates of clay Buddha figurines, bound for a fictitious export company in Luang Prabang. The statues were hollow, their heads snapped off cleanly. Inside each, a glass capsule, vacuum sealed, no bigger than a matchbox, 20 per crate. The route would carry them downriver, then overland through forests too dense for proper roads. There, the shipment would cross an unguarded stretch 10 kilometers south of the official checkpoint. But to do that, one critical player needed to look away. His name was Captain Manan, an ambitious officer with a fondness for foreign jazz and a reputation for turning petty smugglers into public examples. He liked spectacles, headlines, confiscated goods lined up on tables like trophies. He was dangerous not because he was incorruptible, but because his price changed with his mood. So Sai Baa didn't pay him. He paid his barber, a thin, balding man named Bo. For years, Bo had shaved the captain's neck with a blade older than the officer himself. One wrong twitch and, well, no need to imagine it. The captain trusted Bo more than his own deputy. Sai Baa sent Bo a message, not a threat, a recipe. Written on a stained napkin in half-legible script was a dish called mu hong, sweet pork belly, slow-cooked in garlic and black pepper. At the bottom, one line, best enjoyed tomorrow. Invite your favorite customer. That was all. At noon the next day, Captain Manoon sat in Bo's back room, slurping pork belly, unaware that the checkpoint had been left in the hands of a recruit fresh out of basic training. The boy let the clay Buddhas pass without a second glance. He was too focused on the radio, which had just begun playing a new song about broken hearts and missing mothers. The statues arrived in Luang Prabang at dusk. They were unloaded beside crates of fireworks and taken to a warehouse painted to look like a fish sauce distributor. Inside, two women in rubber gloves cracked open the Buddhas with tiny hammers and began extracting the capsules. They did it while humming lullabies. One mainstream historical fact: Thailand and Laos in the 1970s were flooded with cross-border smuggling activity. Not just drugs, but guns, refugees, and political documents. The Mekong River acted both as a border and a highway. It wasn't just the heroin that moved, it was power, in fluid form. Many people still think that men like Sai Baa relied on violence to maintain control. But think about it. How do you keep an entire network loyal when guns are loud and loyalty is fragile? You build webs, gentle ones, made of favors, food, and moments like a shared pork dish in the middle of a war zone. So what do you think? Can an empire be held together by silk thread instead of steel wire? Back in Bangkok, Sai Baa received confirmation via an odd source, a postcard from Luang Prabang. No return address, no message. Just a photograph of a reclining Buddha, but the Buddha was upside down. That was the signal. He slipped the card into a book on his shelf. The spine read, Meditations of Ajahn Mun, a monk known for silence so absolute, it was said you could hear your own karma creeping in behind you. Sai Baa liked that. That night he dined alone, steamed jasmine rice, salted duck egg, a small bowl of pork belly and pepper, the same dish Captain Manoon had eaten. He chewed slowly. Outside, rain tapped gently on his shuttered windows. In the alley below, a cat knocked over a trash can and scurried away. The fan turned. The city murmured, and somewhere at the border, the crates of hollow Buddhas now lay empty, waiting to be filled again. If you want to know what Bangkok thinks before it says anything, you ask the ferrymen. They work the klongs, narrow canals that wind through the city like old veins. Long tailboats dart through the water, their engines coughing like old men, their drivers half-masked in cloth and attitude. They see everything. Lovers meeting beneath bridges, packages passed with casual glances, cops taking bribes before breakfast, and whispers, always whispers. Sai Baa never underestimated the klong men. The river may feed the city, but it's the canals that speak for it. And Sai Baa, always listening, learned to hear the difference between silence and secrets. He didn't pay them like informants. That would insult them. No, he gave them fuel, repairs, a free seat at the noodle shop where the broth simmered for 20 hours. In return, they gave him the most valuable thing in a city built on pretense, what no one said aloud. One of them, Jay, a man with one good eye and a mouthful of gold fillings, brought Sai Baa news that changed everything. Something stirring behind the Navy warehouse. Jay mumbled one morning over a bowl of soup. Foreigners. Not soldiers. Not diplomats. The ones who walk like they don't expect the ground to move. Sai Baa didn't ask who. He already had a guess. Americans, not soldiers. Not embassy staff. Private contractors. Probably the kind who wore Hawaiian shirts to deflect suspicion, but carried pistols in ankle holsters. They had begun to appear more frequently near the docks, sniffing around warehouses that never quite made it onto shipping manifests. Their presence wasn't official, which made them more dangerous. Official meant paperwork. These men preferred shadows. Sai Baa adjusted his spoon. He'd known this moment would come. With the U.S. war in Vietnam nearing its chaotic end, all eyes were turning back toward the heroin routes. The supply was flowing too well. Someone had noticed. And when someone notices, someone starts asking the wrong questions in the right places. Many people still think the Americans were only focused on Saigon in the mid-70s, but that's not quite right. With the war winding down, Southeast Asia became a chessboard of shifting interest. Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, all in play. So what do you think? When soldiers come home, do the shadows they cast stay behind? Sai Baa needed to know how much they knew. He summoned a favor, not from the Klongs this time, but from a cleaner at the Montien Hotel. A woman named Niran, who ironed pillowcases and listened like her life depended on it, because it did. Her brother had once been caught stealing from a military convoy. Sai Baa paid the fine, quietly, discreetly, without thanks. That silence earned him her loyalty. She told him that one of the Americans, tall, ginger hair, pockmarked cheek, had met twice in the hotel bar with a Thai naval officer. Both times the meetings ended with silence and whiskey. And both times, the officer left first, head low. Foreign money stirring, she whispered, folding towels. But it's not theirs. Sai Baa considered this. If it wasn't American government money, it was something worse. Private interest. And private interest was hard to buy, because it already came with its own price tag, and no receipt. Later that week, a body washed up in one of the Klongs near Sai Baa's warehouse. Male. Thai. Mid-30s. No ID. Wearing a blue long-sleeve shirt, too thick for the heat. Inside the pocket, a key card from a Western hotel and a note scrawled in English. Ask about the rice. No one claimed the body. Police filed the report. Case closed. Accidental drowning. But Sai Baa knew better. The man had asked the wrong question too close to the wrong bag. The rice again. Always the rice. He spent that evening walking alone through Talat Noi, a part of Bangkok where the buildings lean like tired old men and the air smells like rust and fried dough. He watched a boy feed fish off a dock, an old woman sweep incense ash from her doorstep, a sleeping dog twitch at the foot of a broken Buddha statue. He was looking, not for answers, but for change. There's a moment when a city begins to shift, when the whispers grow restless, when ferrymen stop talking, when cleaners fold a little faster, when the air itself feels more alert. Bangkok had entered that state. The Klong whisper network was full of static. People were seeing shadows they didn't recognize. It was time to move something, or someone. That night, Sai Baa relocated his operations center. Not a full move, just a diversion. Enough to redirect suspicion. The clay Buddha shipments were paused. The rice sacks rerouted through Patani. The pink envelopes went silent for 72 hours. Instead, he launched a small, strange shipment. Hundreds of paper lanterns, bound for a festival in Chiang Mai. Each lantern was rigged, not with drugs, but with information. Inside the base of each, a folded slip of carbon paper with 5 digits and a scent strip, jasmine, to identify authenticity. It was a test, a signal. Anyone intercepting them would find nothing illegal, but anyone expecting them would understand. The real shipment would follow later. The Americans wouldn't know what to make of it. And in confusion, Sai Baa found cover. Back on the water, Jay the ferryman passed him a small tin box wrapped in newspaper. Inside, a compass with no needle, a lock of hair, and a photograph of the Chow Phraya at dusk. No message, but Sai Baa understood. The ferryman had gone quiet, which meant the city was too loud, so he stayed inside that week. Let the dust settle. Let the ground stop moving. In his room, the fan squeaked slightly louder than usual. A blade slightly off balance, the kind of detail most people ignore. But not Sai Baa. He wrote a note. Balance can betray you, softly at first. Then he slid it into a pink envelope and placed it inside a hollow book titled Thai Proverbs for Gentlemen. No one would find it, not unless they asked the right person, or the wrong one. Either way, Sai Baa was ready, because if the Klongs were whispering louder than usual, then something, or someone, was about to drown. She walked like she had never heard the word danger. Graceful, deliberate, and just slow enough to make the whole street turn. Sai Baa, watching from his usual perch behind the lace-curtained window, didn't blink. He knew who she was before her heels even clicked against the cracked tiles outside the apothecary, the general's niece. Her name was Siren, 23, a law student on paper, a political chess piece in silk. She had her uncle's eyes, sharp, strategic, but none of his restraint. While the general built his empire with medals and radio addresses, she maneuvered through Bangkok's social scene like a cat through incense smoke. They had met once before. Sai Baa remembered the moment clearly. A reception at the Mandarin Oriental, where diplomats drank French wine and everyone pretended not to notice the man, with no title being escorted to the center table. She was there in a red dress, laughing at something whispered in her ear by a British attaché. When their eyes met, she didn't smile. That night, she sent him a folded napkin from the dessert table. Written on it, "I know where your jasmine grows." No threat, just an opening move. Now, nearly a year later, she reappeared. Siren entered, without knocking. Of course she did. She took off her heels at the door and walked barefoot across the bamboo mat, her anklet chiming softly. She smelled of lemongrass and mild defiance. Sai Baa said nothing. She placed a small package on the table. Inside, a ledger, handwritten in the same looping scrawl as her uncle's old war journals. It wasn't hers. It was taken, stolen perhaps. "I thought you'd want to see where your favors end up," she said. He opened the book. Inside were names. Not surprising ones. Low-level customs officers, river inspectors, junior naval accountants. But the last page held something else. A signature he knew. An accountant in the Ministry of Finance. A man who'd been quietly laundering portions of military aid, routing it through charities and relief groups, turning blood money into clean currency. Sai Baa looked up. Siren leaned forward. "He's moving against you. Quietly. Blaming the heroin routes on your network to gain American favor. They want to make a show of one arrest. A big one. You're the ghost they want to photograph." He considered this. One mainstream historical fact. In the mid-1970s, as the Vietnam War's final act unfolded, Thailand's military regime struggled to balance favor between the American withdrawal and rising internal dissent. Scapegoats became necessary. Headlines became strategy. Many people still think Sai Baa operated without enemies because he avoided the spotlight. But in truth, The shadows attract their own predators. So what do you think? When the jungle goes silent, is it peace or is something hunting? Siren didn't wait for thanks. She stood, brushed invisible dust from her silk skirt, and said, "I want a favor in return." "Of course. You'll know what it is when I ask," she added. "Until then, maybe plant your jasmine elsewhere." He nodded once. That was as much as anyone ever got from him. After she left, the fan continued spinning. But the air felt different, thicker, like the moment before a summer storm. Sai Baa slid the ledger into a hidden drawer behind an old cassette tape labeled Rain Sounds Hour 2. He lit a coil of mosquito repellent and sat back. It was time to test the general. He arranged a meeting, not with the man himself, but with his secretary, a retired colonel with arthritis and expensive taste in watches. They met at a floating restaurant where the menu had no prices, and the view hid 3 boats loaded with unknown goods. Over grilled river prawns, Sai Baa made no accusations, just conversation, old times, flood patterns, how Thailand used to be quieter. Then he mentioned the accountant's name. A single flick of the colonel's chopsticks gave him the answer. Yes, it was true. The general had indeed sanctioned a quiet pivot, a sacrificial trade. Let the Americans have a name, just not his. And who better than Sai Baa? A man with no official ties, no military backing, no photographs, just whispers. Sai Baa smiled. Then he changed the topic to music. Back in his apartment, Sai Baa moved quickly. The rice roots were to be frozen. Every shipment rerouted through Songkhla via fishing boats with pre-bribed harbor masters. The pink envelopes would go dormant for 2 weeks. The clay Buddhas would be stored in a Buddhist temple currently under renovation, its head monk conveniently on sabbatical in India. And the accountant? He would be invited to dinner. That's where the general had miscalculated. Sai Baa didn't fear exposure. He planned for it. He kept insurance, files, letters, photographs, stored in places even his most loyal runners didn't know. Some were in the hands of monks, others buried under mango trees, a few simply floating through Bangkok's postal system, addressed to no one, until the right keyword appeared. He wasn't a kingpin. He was a librarian of danger, a collector of plausible deniability. Dinner with the accountant was civil. They met in a private room at a French restaurant. Candlelight, music, nothing out of place. Over soup, Sai Baa handed him a gift, a book of Thai proverbs, 2nd edition, 1968. The accountant smiled politely. He never opened it. Had he opened it, he would have found a note. 3 words. We burned together. That night, the accountant called the general. The next morning, the operation against Sai Baa was suspended. The Americans never heard why. Just that the subject had gone quiet, which was of course the point. Back in Chinatown, Sai Baa sat by the window. Outside, a boy chased a paper lantern down the street. A fruit vendor sang off-key. Somewhere, in a back alley, the general's niece ordered a bowl of soup and paid with a coin that hadn't been minted in 20 years. And above it all, the fan kept spinning, steady now. Just like Sai Baa, the rain came hard that night, a thick tropical curtain that made the neon lights of Bangkok bleed like watercolors down the windows. Sirens wailed in the distance. Not the urgent kind, but the slow, exhausted ones. The kind that meant someone had lost something they wouldn't get back. Sai Baa didn't flinch. He stood at the back exit of a gambling den in Thornbury, 1 foot in the dark, the other on wet pavement. Behind him, a mahjong table lay overturned, and the floor was smeared with soy sauce, blood, or both. A police raid had just stormed the place. Men scrambled. Cards flew. A gun may have gone off, or it may have been a firecracker. Sai Baa hadn't been touched. He'd simply walked out the back as the front door was kicked in, not fast, not slow, like a man returning from buying cigarettes. He stepped into an alley, lit only by the reflection of a flickering red sign in a puddle. A young boy, his runner, was already waiting at the corner, holding a plastic bag full of steamed dumplings and a change of clothes. Sai Baa removed his silk shirt and slipped into a worn brown one that smelled like charcoal and rain. Then they walked, side by side, into the storm. The gambling den had been one of his oldest fronts. Not because it brought money, frankly it didn't, but because it brought people. Men from the docks, cops from the precinct, foreigners who spoke too loud. All the city's broken compasses passed through that room eventually. Now it was gone, burned, exposed, useless, which meant one thing. Someone was testing him. Later that night, he sat in his apartment, drying his feet with a threadbare towel. A hot kettle whistled gently on a portable burner. The walls smelled of mildew and lemongrass. On the floor beside him lay a red envelope, not pink. This one was different. Inside was a Polaroid. The front of the gambling den, burning. A shadowy figure in a doorway. The back of a man's head. Sai Baa's head. The photo was blurred, but intentional. On the back, a note written in perfect English. "We see you. Let's talk." He read it once. Then he lit a match and watched it curl into ash. Whoever sent it hadn't sent a threat. They'd sent an invitation. And that, more than anything, made it dangerous. He made one phone call that night, to an old contact, a woman who ran a small karaoke bar in Phra Khanong. She answered on the second ring. "Is it time?" she asked. "Not yet," he replied. "But open the back room. Dust off the mirror." That was all. The mirror was Sai Baa's emergency sanctuary. A sealed room beneath the karaoke bar, lined with lead and papered over in cheap floral wallpaper. No electronics, no lines in, no lines out. Only messages passed by hand, and an old one-way mirror behind which Sai Baa could observe the room without being seen. It was where he went when the quiet stopped being safe. 3 nights later, he received a second message. This one came via a delivery man claiming to have the wrong address. A bag of charcoal. Inside, a business card tucked between the lumps. No name. Just an American area code and a stamped word in red ink. Asset. Sai Baa raised an eyebrow. That word again. The first time he'd heard it was over papaya salad and whiskey, years ago. A man from Langley, who never gave a real name, had asked him what it would take to switch sides. Sai Baa had smiled. "There are no sides," he said, "just doors." Now, someone wanted to open a door again. He made his decision. At 1 a.m., he walked into the karaoke bar. The music was loud. The lights were dim. But in the back room, past a half-drunk hostess pretending to laugh at a banker's bad joke, he slipped through a concealed panel and down a narrow staircase. He entered the mirrored room and sat. 10 minutes later, the door opened. A man walked in, foreign, tall, bad posture, a limp in his left leg. He looked like a failed missionary or a retired tennis coach, exactly the kind of unremarkable that set Sai Baa's teeth on edge. The man sat and pulled out a notebook. He didn't speak at first, just placed a photo on the table, then another, then a third. All of them were real. Warehouses, routes, names, some from 5 years ago, some from 5 days ago. Sai Baa said nothing. Then the man finally spoke. "We don't want to stop you. We want to use you." The offer was simple. Too simple. Access in exchange for silence. Routes in exchange for autonomy. A few names. A few numbers. Enough to let someone in Washington sleep better at night. Sai Baa didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a single pink envelope. He slid it across the table. "Before I decide," he said gently, "read this." The man opened it. Inside, 11 digits and 1 time. Then a final sentence, scrawled in Thai. "If you really see me, then you know where I'll be." The man left. Sai Baa remained. He poured tea into a chipped porcelain cup and sipped slowly. The walls buzzed softly with the sound of a cheap fan. Back on the streets, the rain had stopped, the sirens had faded, and the man with no name, no photos, and a growing number of enemies smiled because he hadn't lost control. He'd simply moved the game to a different table. He met the American again 2 days later on a boat. Not a yacht, not a fishing vessel, just an old teakwood ferry converted into a dinner cruise, the kind that served watery cocktails and string quartet covers of Elvis songs. Tourists filled the lower deck, snapping photos of Wat Arun as the sun dipped behind the spires. But Sai Baa wasn't interested in temples or sunsets. He sat on the upper deck beneath a bamboo awning, legs crossed, cup of chrysanthemum tea steaming in his hands. The boat rocked gently, the engine a low hum beneath it all, just loud enough to drown whispers. The American approached from behind, not wearing a suit this time. He had on a white short-sleeve shirt and khakis, trying hard to look like a harmless retiree. It didn't work. Sai Baa didn't look up. "You're early," he said. "I'm paranoid," the American replied, easing into the chair across from him. "Good," Sai Baa said. "That means you're still alive." The boat pulled away from the dock. Tourists below cheered. Someone popped a champagne cork. It sounded like a gunshot, and both men flinched, but only a little. "Did you read the envelope?" Sai Baa asked, still not looking at him. "I did. Shipment details, real ones. You tested me." "No," Sai Baa corrected gently. "I tested your memory." The American said nothing for a moment, then leaned in. "Look, we're not your enemy, but the world's changing fast. We can't stop everything coming through Bangkok, but if we know what you're moving, we can control the headlines." Sai Baa let that sit in the air. Below, a young couple laughed too loudly over a plate of lukewarm pad thai. A saxophonist warmed up in the corner. The lights on the river flickered, golden and soft, like promises whispered at closing time. "And in exchange?" Sai Baa asked. The American smiled faintly. "We stay out of your personal business. You help us plug a few leaks, and you keep your roots clean, unbothered." Sai Baa turned his gaze to the river. The Chao Phraya moved like always, slow, wide, ancient, older than governments, older than bribes. "Clean roots," he said, as if testing the words. "You think heroin is the messiest thing moving through this city?" A pause, then, "It's not?" Sai Baa finally looked at him. "Fear is messier," he said. "And trust? That's the filthiest of all." The American nodded. He didn't disagree. One mainstream historical fact. During the 1970s, various intelligence agencies operated unofficially throughout Southeast Asia. These liaisons often collaborated with local underworld figures, hoping to control narcotics movement, not by eradication, but by redirection. The aim was plausible deniability. The result was institutional ambiguity. Many people still think the CIA's ties to the heroin trade were myth, but records, fragmented, redacted, reluctantly released, suggest otherwise. So what do you think? Can a government pretend not to notice if it benefits from what it claims to oppose? Back on the ferry, Sai Baa changed the subject. "I need a name," he said. "Someone in the Internal Security Department. Quiet, invisible. The kind who approves budgets no one checks." The American raised an eyebrow, and in return, Sai Baa passed him another envelope. This one wasn't pink. It was gray, smudged, tired. Inside, a list of shipments bound for Australia, 3 weeks ahead, hidden in shampoo bottles and candied ginger boxes. Not Sai Baa's product, someone else's. A rival. The American blinked. This is gold." "No," Sai Baa said. "It's insurance." The deal was done. Back on shore, The ferry docked as if nothing important had happened. Tourists stepped off smiling, a little tipsy, already forgetting the city that cradled them for an hour. The saxophonist packed up. The captain lit a cigarette and looked out over the oily current, and Sai Baa disappeared into the crowd, slipping away like steam from a teacup. Later that night, a letter arrived at a government office on Rama 4 Road, typed, neatly folded. It nominated a budget officer named Arthit Prachaporn for an unscheduled reassignment. No one asked why, because the person who received the letter owed a favor. He didn't know to whom, just that it was time to repay it. And that's how Arthit was moved, quietly, efficiently, from his post overseeing narcotics logistics to a new position managing agricultural subsidies in Isan. He never knew why. That's how Sai Baa worked. Not through threats, through shifts, gentle redirections. One moment you're watching the harbor, the next you're pricing fertilizer. Back in his room, Sai Baa opened his window. The rain had stopped. The night smelled of fried garlic and wet cement. His fan ticked twice, then resumed its steady whir. He stared at a map of Bangkok, dotted with tiny thumbtacks, each one a location, a memory, a favor pending or paid. He added a new one. This tack was gold. He labeled it asset conditional, because nothing and no one stayed permanent. Not governments, not alliances, not even a fixer like Sai Baa. At the heart of every good trick is a blasphemy so subtle it passes for genius. That's what Sai Baa thought as he stood barefoot in the inner chamber of Wat Chana Songkram, watching a monk hammer the final nail into the base of a temple bell. The echo rang through the compound, low, rich, holy, and nobody knew that inside the bell's bronze cavity sat 3 packets of heroin wrapped in lacquered banana leaves. The act itself wasn't new. For centuries, smugglers across Asia had hidden contraband in religious artifacts, but Sai Baa's method added an unsettling elegance. These weren't portable bells or ceremonial props. These were permanent fixtures, impossible to inspect without desecration. Each bell was sealed, blessed, hung, and left to sing its lie into the air with every chime. This one would hang for decades, and so would the truth inside. It had started as an experiment, a test of how far invisibility could stretch. Sai Baa paid for the restoration of 6 temples over 2 years. Nothing grand, just humble repairs. New tiles, gold leaf for Buddha statues, fresh robes for the monks. In exchange, he asked for a few favors. A bell here, a hollowed base there, space behind a ceremonial drum, a blessing perhaps, over a statue that was, in fact, a smuggling container shipped from Rangoon. None of the monks knew the full story. They didn't need to. Sai Baa's gifts came with reverence. He never mocked the religion. He bowed properly, donated generously, attended festivals with a calm face and clean hands. That's why they let him in. That's why no one questioned him walking barefoot through sacred halls. Even when the air behind him smelled faintly of clove and opium, he never kept product in the temples long. Just enough time to wait for heat to die down, for shipments to reroute. Sometimes it was weeks, sometimes only days. But every time the bell rang, it didn't just mark time, it bought it. One mainstream historical fact. Throughout Southeast Asia, temples have often served dual purposes, spiritual and social. In times of war, they've hidden refugees, weapons, and food. In times of peace, they've been used, occasionally unknowingly, as smuggling depots. Sacredness, after all, is a powerful shield. Many people still think Sai Baa desecrated the faith, but others argue he protected it, never involving monks directly, never causing harm within temple walls. So what do you think? Can sanctity survive if the sin is never seen? That afternoon, after the bell was raised and blessed, Sai Baa sat with the abbot in the garden. They drank tea made from dried bale fruit and spoke softly of the changing seasons. The abbot was nearly blind, but his words were sharp. He spoke of the impermanence of things, of noise and silence, of ghosts that cling to certain places and men. At one point he paused and asked, "Do you believe in karma, Baa?" Sai Baa smiled faintly. "I believe in timing," he replied. The abbot laughed. "Same thing. One just wears a watch." They talked until the shadows lengthened, then parted with a shared silence that felt more sincere than any chant. Back in the city, a new shipment was en route, a collection of jade figurines arriving by train from Kanchanaburi. Each figurine had a hollow spine, packed with powdered heroin, compacted so tightly it clinked like glass when tapped. The train arrived at Hua Lamphong Station, on time, unnoticed. One crate was mistakenly, intentionally, left on the platform. It was picked up by a municipal worker who thought it odd, but not odd enough to report. Inside the crate, beneath layers of straw, was a note, a gift for the gods. The crate was delivered, anonymously, to a temple warehouse scheduled for renovation. Sai Baa didn't need to say a word. The system worked like a tide. It simply moved. Meanwhile, 2 American agents, new faces, fresh from Saigon, were interviewing port officials along the Chao Phraya. They asked about unusual shipments, counterfeit manifests, suspicious warehouses. One official nodded politely, then suggested they visit a temple in Nonthaburi that recently received a large donation of imported marble. Said he heard the marble had come with the blessing of a very generous man. The Americans didn't take the hint, but the marble was real. Sai Baa had made sure of it. The trick wasn't to fake everything. It was to occasionally tell the truth so precisely that lies could pass unnoticed in its shadow. Later that week, the lead agent was reassigned. Burnout, they said. Too much noise, not enough signal. Back in Chinatown, Sai Baa received an update. The bell had passed its final inspection. The heroin was gone, already unpacked, repackaged, sold off in fragments that would eventually make their way to the dance floors of Paris and the alleys of Manila. The bell remained, hollow once again, but with no trace. The monks still rang it daily, and each time it sang, Bangkok heard nothing unusual. Only time, only sound, only the invisible trace of a man who knew exactly how far a whisper could carry when disguised as prayer. That night, Sai Baa poured a bowl of water over his windowsill to cool the air. He folded a clean shirt, burned 2 sticks of incense, and as the scent drifted upward, he whispered a name into the smoke. Not a threat, a promise. One day, someone would ring that bell and wonder why it sounded different. They'd never know, but he would, and that was enough. The Mekong moved like glass under moonlight, wide and slow and deceptively calm. If the Chao Phraya was Bangkok's bloodstream, then the Mekong was its memory, a river that remembered everything but never spoke. And tonight, it played host to one of Sai Baa's oldest rituals, a floating deal. It wasn't glamorous. No speedboats, no leather briefcases, just a simple wooden skiff, its sides patched with rusted nails, tied to another near the Laotian bank. 2 men stood in each boat, silhouetted in lantern light, not speaking. Between them was a crate. Inside, currency. Not baht, not dollars, just value, compressed, concealed, transferable. The deal was old-fashioned, heroin for diamonds, small, quiet, untraceable. A currency that could vanish into jewelry stores or disappear into vaults. Sai Baa never liked holding cash for too long. Money talked. Diamonds, on the other hand, sat quietly. He wasn't on the boat himself. Of course not, but his eyes were. The man overseeing the exchange was named Rin. Young, sharp, silent. He wore a fishing hat and chewed sugarcane to keep himself calm. He knew not to smile. He knew when to cough. He had memorized the backup plan in case the river patrol made an appearance. Tip the crate, lose the product, and vanish. Sai Baa didn't blame people for losing shipments, only for trying to salvage them after they were already gone. The crates changed hands. No gunfire, no tension. Just two boats parting ways as if nothing important had happened. And that's how it always worked. You didn't announce the big shipments. You let them pass under silence, like a good insult or a heartfelt goodbye. Back in Bangkok, Sai Baa sat on his balcony, the city stretched before him like an open case file. A breeze stirred his tea. In the distance, a dog barked. He was waiting for a phone call, but not from Rin. Tonight, the call came from Saigon, or what was left of it. The city was falling. Helicopters spun like dragonflies above embassy roofs, and people clawed at fences hoping for a seat, a favor, a miracle. What had once been a foreign war was now a domestic reckoning, and everyone who'd made a living from the shadows was trying to slip away before the lights came on. One such man called Sai Baa. His name was Bin, and he owed Sai Baa 12 years of loyalty and $2 million in untraceable goods. "Help me," he whispered through static. "They're closing in. I have one crate left. Good stuff. Clean. It's yours if you can get me out." Sai Baa didn't answer right away. He poured more tea, let the steam rise, then said, "Where are you?" "Near Tan Son Nhat," Bin said. "I have friends, but they want out too." Sai Baa closed his eyes. Tan Son Nhat was chaos. Too close, too many eyes, no safe air. But there was another way. "Go to the roof of the Jat Than Hotel," he said. "There's a laundry cart in the hallway. Inside a radio. Tune it to 100.7. Leave it on. That's all." Bin was confused. He tried to ask more, but the line went dead. Sai Baa moved fast. He called Jack, the pilot, the drunk, the reliable ghost. "You still fly for Ghost?" Sai Baa asked. Jack laughed, somewhere in Laos. "Only if they tip well." "Good," Sai Baa said. "You're going back in." The next day, Jack landed on a rice paddy outside Saigon. Barely a landing strip, more like a suggestion of one. Bin made it to the hotel rooftop, just in time to see the plane swoop in like a dragon with metal wings. He got out. So did the crate. Sai Baa never opened it. He simply stored it. In a warehouse with no signage, in a part of Bangkok where street names change depending on who you asked. The contents, probably heroin, or diamonds, or a very specific kind of regret. A mainstream fact. The fall of Saigon in April 1975 marked the end of the Vietnam War, but not the end of its ghosts. Countless operatives, dealers, and intermediaries fled south. Many arrived in Bangkok. Some brought secrets. Some brought favors they couldn't repay. Sai Baa collected both. Many people still think the heroin trade collapsed after the Americans pulled out. But it didn't. It restructured. The supply stayed steady. The buyers changed. So what do you think? When a war ends, does the demand for escape end too? The night the deal on the Mekong took place, a Thai patrol boat did pass by. The officer in charge glanced at the two skiffs, squinting. One of them flashed a red lantern twice, long, then short. The officer nodded, turned his boat, and left. No questions. Because 2 weeks earlier, his daughter had received a scholarship to a private school in Chiang Mai. Paid in full. Anonymously. Sai Baa's doing. Back in his room, Sai Baa opened a drawer lined with velvet and placed a small diamond inside. Not for sale, not for barter, just for memory. Because not all valuables are meant to move. Some are meant to stay hidden until the right night, until the right boat, until the river, remembering everything, finally speaks. It was the middle of the night when the phone rang. Once. Not twice, just once. That was enough. Sai Baa sat up from his bamboo mat, bare feet finding the cool floor. Outside, the cicadas were louder than usual, the air thick with pre-monsoon weight. He slipped on a loose shirt, walked past the lazy spin of his ceiling fan, and picked up the envelope waiting on his doorstep. It wasn't pink, it wasn't gray, it was white, blank, crisp, anonymous. Inside was a torn corner of a newspaper. No markings, just the date, April 27th, 1975, and circled in pencil, one sentence. Saigon's final phone call may not connect. Sai Baa understood. The city was crumbling. People were jumping fences. American helicopters had begun their last dance on rooftops. And someone inside the machine was reaching out, not for money, not for exit, but for silence. Sai Baa called no one. Instead, he reached for a bundle of documents wrapped in cloth, handwritten logs, receipts, coded letters, and one photograph of a man standing outside a bar in Cholon, grinning like he had never learned to be afraid. That man was important, not to the Americans, not to the Vietnamese, but to Sai Baa. He had once intercepted a shipment of fentanyl-laced heroin destined for Bangkok, destroyed it himself, and warned Sai Baa about the men trying to poison his network. No charge, just loyalty. Now he was calling in his favor, or rather, letting Sai Baa decide if it was worth returning. Sai Baa didn't know many people, but this he owed. Within the hour, a new plan was in motion. He rerouted 3 couriers in Nakhon Phanom to a riverside shack where 2 Laotian smugglers, long believed dead, kept an old military jeep under a tarp. That jeep would drive 2 men across the Thai border into Cambodia, then into a mining route once used by the Japanese during the war. If the plan held, they would arrive at a makeshift airfield in time to catch the last cargo plane before the country locked down completely. Sai Baa didn't fly in supplies this time. He flew in paper. Letters. Dozens of them. Written by Thai monks, Buddhist scholars, international journalists, some real, some forged, all vouching for the man's service to humanitarian efforts across Southeast Asia. It was a lie, but it was a beautiful lie, the kind that sounds better than the truth. And so, on April 28th, as Saigon convulsed beneath columns of smoke and betrayal, a single plane lifted off from an unlisted strip of Cambodian clay, carrying 2 men, 3 envelopes, and a single jade elephant in someone's coat pocket. Sai Baa never saw the man again. But years later, in a parcel sent from Amsterdam, he received a book of Vietnamese poetry. Inside, underlined in black ink, "Some debts are paid in absence." He shelved the book next to his Thai proverbs. Never opened it again. Back in Bangkok that week, the city felt different. The fall of Saigon didn't create a ripple. It created a wave. Refugees poured in. Black markets surged. Smugglers turned legitimate. Diplomats turned desperate. Every man who had once played in the gray now clung to paperwork and handshakes, hoping to look official before someone accused them of something real. Sai Baa didn't panic. He adjusted. He rerouted his heroin away from the south. Too hot now. Too many checkpoints pretending to be inspections. Instead, he looked east to the Cambodian ports. Corrupt, distracted, perfect. He met with a shipping magnate who owned 4 aging cargo vessels and a temper shorter than a chopstick. Over tea, Sai Baa offered him the one thing no one else had, a guarantee that none of his ships would ever be searched. "How can you promise that?" the man asked, sweating through his silk collar. Sai Baa passed him a postcard. It showed a smiling girl holding a fish at a dock in Koh Kong. On the back, a name, a real one. A man in the Cambodian Navy with a gambling habit and a daughter who wanted to study in France. The magnate didn't ask more questions. Within a month, Sai Baa's product was moving again, this time in crates labeled as dried seafood, destined for ports that didn't know how to ask the right questions. A mainstream historical fact. After the fall of Saigon, Thailand saw a dramatic uptick in unregulated commerce, licit and illicit. Its ports became swollen with desperate trades, its black markets bursting with goods smuggled in both directions. Borders became stories. Stories became currencies. Many people still think Sai Baa was a creature of stability, that he thrived in silence. But no, he thrived in change. That's what made him dangerous. So what do you think? Can a man truly vanish if he always keeps moving slightly faster than history? That night, he lit a cigarette on his balcony. Not because he wanted to smoke, but because he liked the scent of tobacco curling upward, tracing invisible lines toward stars you couldn't see through the Bangkok haze. In the drawer beside him sat the original white envelope. He hadn't burned it. Not yet, because something about it felt unfinished. Maybe it was the simplicity, the way it didn't threaten or plead, just a sentence, just a reminder that even the most invisible men leave fingerprints when the world starts shaking. Down below, the streets pulsed with neon and motorbike engines. A young girl walked by, her braids swinging like a metronome. In her pocket, perhaps, was a pink envelope, or maybe just gum. It didn't matter. Sai Baa leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the slow churn of the ceiling fan. History was shifting again, and he, as always, had already moved 3 steps ahead. Sai Baa never liked new uniforms. They were too crisp, too loud. People in fresh epaulets walked like they were already writing their memoirs. And Bangkok, in 1975, was suddenly full of them. Young officers, newly transferred from southern provinces, all eager to prove they could clean up the city's streets. Of course, they never started where the dirt actually was. They started with gambling dens, massage parlors, rice warehouses with suspicious shipment schedules, the places that smelled like trouble, but only because the real trouble had left 20 minutes earlier. Sai Baa watched this wave with the indifference of a man who'd already seen it 5 times before. They would kick down the right doors, arrest the wrong men, and write glowing reports about broken pipelines and disrupted syndicates. Meanwhile, the real heroin would move through cargo labeled as prayer beads, behind trucks full of coconuts, in the gaps between ambition and attention. But still, he adjusted. That week, he moved operations from Bangkok to Nakhon Sawan, just for a while. A sleepy province at the confluence of rivers. Fewer foreigners, fewer headlines. He liked the quiet there, the long, slow afternoons, the monks who didn't ask questions, the children who didn't know who he was and didn't care. There, in a rented teak house surrounded by banana trees, he waited for the heat to settle. He wasn't alone. The courier known as Gam sat with him. Young, sharp-featured, unreadable. Gam had once pulled a knife on a customs officer for trying to open the wrong crate, and somehow talked his way out of it with a laugh and a tin of pineapple sweets. Sai Baa liked him, not for his loyalty, but for his timing. They sat on the porch watching dragonflies flit over the canal. Sai Baa sipped tea. Gam chewed dried squid. Then, without preamble, Gam said, "There's a new voice on the police radio. Northern accent, keeps asking about the bells." Sai Baa didn't react. "Which bells?" "The ones you paid for." So it had started. The temples were being watched. Quietly, carefully. Not by locals. Not yet. But someone, somewhere, had noticed the bells were newer than the buildings around them. That they'd arrived too quickly. That no one quite remembered who had donated them. Sai Baa nodded once, then told Gam to pack. They left the house that night, but not before Sai Baa lit 3 incense sticks and placed them in a small clay pot by the door, for the spirits, for memory, for no reason at all. They traveled south slowly, avoiding major roads. At one point, they stopped in a village where an old woman sold mooncakes out of a rusted cart. She gave Sai Baa a paper bag and, without looking up, said, The one you buried still smiles. Sai Baa gave her a coin from 1962 and didn't speak. The paper bag contained a map, hand-drawn, marked in faded ink. It showed a stretch of jungle near the Malaysian border, with a small X near a bend in the river. No one but Sai Baa could have read it, because he was the one who'd drawn it 13 years earlier, when he buried his first stash. Not heroin, not cash, but names. A ledger of real names, real debts, real faces. Back then, it had been his insurance. Now, it was his escape plan. The jungle was the failsafe. But first, he had something to settle in Bangkok. He returned quietly, under the name Somchai, wearing a borrowed jacket and a fisherman's hat. He didn't go back to his old haunts. He didn't visit the apothecary. He stayed in a motel beside a railway yard, where the smell of diesel masked everything else. There, he met with a man from the Ministry of Culture, a collector of antiques, a drinker of bitter coffee, a bureaucrat who had, 20 years ago, helped approve Sai Baa's first temple donation, under the table, under the radar, in exchange for a promise never to touch his family. Sai Baa had kept the promise, and now he needed another favor. "A bell must fall," he said. The man blinked. "Which one?" "The one near the American school." The man didn't ask why. He knew better. 2 nights later, a fire broke out near the temple compound. The blaze was minor, blamed on faulty wiring. No injuries. But the bell collapsed, cracked open. Inside, nothing. Of course, the stash had been moved 3 days earlier, transferred into a replica Buddha statue bound for a shrine in Chiang Rai. The collapse was just theater, just enough to show the new voices on the police radio that they'd found what they were looking for. Sai Baa knew they hadn't, but they'd stopped looking. For a while. One mainstream historical fact: during this era, Thailand underwent a series of anti-corruption drives, some genuine, most symbolic. Public arrests were made to appease foreign allies. Headlines were fed. But the real networks adapted, shifted, survived. Many people still think Sai Baa's power came from bribes. But power isn't bought, it's remembered. So, what do you think? Can a man truly disappear when every structure he's touched still carries his blueprint? That night, Sai Baa returned to Nakhon Sawan. The house was gone, burned by accident or design. He never found out. But the banana trees were still there. He sat beside them and smoked a cigarette for the first time in 5 years. Just one, then buried the ashes in a small clay cup and whispered something into the dirt. A name, maybe, or a promise, or just silence. The fan in Bangkok still turned, slowly, over a room that hadn't changed in months. A postcard lay on the desk, from Chiang Rai. A picture of a shrine. No message, no return address. But the Buddha in the photo? Its right hand pointed down, toward the earth, toward something buried, toward the part of Sai Baa's story that no one had found. Yet, the back alley behind the tea house was narrow, just wide enough for a man to walk with a shoulder brushing the wall. The pavement was broken, uneven. Puddles collected after even the smallest rain, and at night, the shadows there felt older than the city itself. It was the kind of place where rumors went to dry out before traveling again. Sai Baa hadn't been down that alley in years, but on this particular evening, with a new name blooming through the city like fungus, the Nam's nephew, some whispered, or maybe the interior minister's boy. He decided it was time. A new player had emerged. Young, loud, well-dressed. He operated out of a row of renovated tea houses near Democracy Monument. Not discreet, not subtle, but backed by enough firepower to make people nervous. People were beginning to say his name instead of Sai Baa's, which was fine. Sai Baa had never been interested in being remembered, but being replaced was another matter. He walked the alley slowly, sandals wet, coat collar turned up. The city buzzed behind him. Election talk, protest songs, the hum of new politics trying to reinvent old failures. But this was where he still held the map. Not of streets, not of power, of the timing of footsteps, of which doors creaked, of who coughed behind curtains. The tea house was quiet when he entered. Inside, 3 men played Chinese chess with the gravity of monks. A girl carried a tray of sweets that no one touched. And at the back, behind a beaded curtain, the new voice of Bangkok sat on a red cushion. He looked up. Young, too young, maybe 28. Polished shoes, sleeves rolled precisely halfway. He didn't stand when Sai Baa entered. That was the first mistake. Sai Baa sat across from him and waited for tea. It came quickly. The girl from earlier poured it. Jasmine, oversteeped. Didn't expect you to come yourself, the man said. I don't send people where I'm not willing to go, Sai Baa replied. The young man smirked. Old rules. Things move faster now. Sai Baa nodded, eyes scanning the room. 4 cameras, 2 hidden microphones, a small ink stain on the cuff of the boy's shirt. Nervous tells, not yet trained away. Faster doesn't mean better, Sai Baa said. It just means louder. The boy leaned in. I'm taking the docks. You know that, right? Sai Baa said nothing. They're already mine, really. The port schedules, the customs roster, even the rice handlers. Sai Baa stirred his tea once. Then why the show? He asked. Why the microphones? Why the performance? The young man hesitated. Sai Baa leaned forward just slightly, lowering his voice until it didn't rise above the steam of his cup. If they're already yours, he whispered. Why do you need to say it? That was the second mistake. The pause that followed. The flicker of doubt in the boy's eyes. Sai Baa stood. You'll do fine, he said, until the weight of your secrets catches up to the size of your shoes. And he left. No threats, no warnings. He didn't need them. 3 days later, a port official called in sick. Then a clerk vanished. Then a crate labeled electrical supplies exploded in the hold of a barge bound for Singapore. No deaths, but enough noise. The young man withdrew his claim. Word on the street was that he'd decided to focus on inland routes instead. Back in his room, Sai Baa stared at a piece of calligraphy hanging near the fan. It read, "The louder the bell, the faster it cracks." He'd kept it for 20 years, a gift from a monk who once hid a ledger in a fish tank. That same monk was now dead. Quietly, softly. In his sleep, they said. But not before sending Sai Baa one final message, scribbled on the back of a temple flyer. Everything returns to the ground, even names. One mainstream historical fact. In 1976, Thailand experienced political upheaval culminating in violent crackdowns, mass arrests, and a brief return to authoritarianism. In the chaos, syndicates either dissolved or went underground. Sai Baa, already underground, barely noticed. Many people still think he disappeared during this time. Vanished. Escaped. Died, maybe. But no, he simply lowered his volume. So what do you think? Can a man become invisible by standing still while the world spins too fast to see? He spent the following month in Chiang Rai, not hiding, listening. At a quiet guest house near the river, he shared breakfast with a retired school teacher who once taught border patrol officers how to read forged documents. She didn't recognize him, of course, but halfway through their second cup of tea, she said, "You remind me of someone. He used to walk like he was already forgiven." Sai Baa smiled, and for the first time in years, he laughed, not loudly, but enough. The customs official sat alone at a long wooden desk, slowly turning a pencil between his fingers, like he was afraid of writing something permanent. The office was dim, lit by a single overhead bulb and a dusty window half covered by vines. Outside, children played in the mud, unaware that this quiet man, this government paper mover, was about to do something very stupid. His name was Anand, not young, not ambitious, just tired. The kind of tired that made you believe a shortcut was a form of justice. He'd found a shipment he wasn't supposed to find, a crate labeled religious supplies, addressed to a remote shrine outside Phitsanulok. He'd opened it himself, not because he suspected anything, but because the manifest had a typo, and the signature looked too clean. Inside, beneath layers of ceremonial cloth and prayer beads, were several sealed jars of powdered incense that didn't smell like incense. Anand, not being an idiot, resealed the crate and signed it off. But then he told someone, a friend, a cousin maybe, over beer, a slip of a sentence. Somebody's hiding ghosts in monk robes. The whisper reached a man named Kuhn, a minor player in Bangkok's shrinking black market. Kuhn saw opportunity. He saw headlines. Maybe he even saw a future in which he was the new name, the new face, the man who finally brought down the myth of Sai Baa. So Kuhn made a call to a journalist. Not a corrupt one, but an eager one. The kind who saw shadows as invitations. The story was drafted within a week. Anonymous sources. A photo of the crate. A diagram of heroin roots hidden in spiritual sanctuaries. The article was scheduled for next month's magazine issue. Buried in the back, but real enough to start a brush fire, and that's where it would have stayed. If the magazine editor hadn't received a gift basket, not a bribe, not money, just a small clay bell, hollow, with a note that read, "Don't mistake the echo for the source." The article was pulled the next day. No questions. The journalist quit 2 weeks later. Left Bangkok. Teaches English in Bali now. As for Anand, he disappeared, not violently, not mysteriously. He was simply transferred to a fishing license office in Krabi. His papers went through without resistance. No one objected. And on his first day, he found a new desk, a new clock, and an envelope with a postcard inside. Wat Arun at sunset. No words, just that image. He kept it, because what else could he do? Sai Baa hadn't ordered punishment. He'd ordered quiet, a reinforcement of the rules, a reminder that the game wasn't over just because the board looked empty. Back in Chinatown, Sai Baa returned to a familiar haunt, a coffee shop run by a woman named Kun Lek, who spoke 6 languages and never asked for clarification. She served him a cold brew with condensed milk and said, "You're in a lot of stories lately." He nodded, but none of them mine, yet. She placed a folded newspaper beside his cup. No article about monks or drugs or sanctuaries. But buried on page 6, a small piece on missing customs records caught his eye. The government was cleaning house again, wiping names, moving pieces. Sai Baa knew what this meant. They were getting ready to offer someone up. They wanted a name, a myth to cut down, and it might as well be him. He stayed in the shop longer than usual, not hiding, just listening. The city had changed. More cars, less river traffic. The klongs weren't whispering anymore. They were choked with plastic and runoff. Ferrymen had become app drivers. Girls in school uniforms now carried smartphones instead of pink envelopes. But there were still codes, still currents. They just moved differently now. He called Gam that night, told him to set up a meeting. Not with rivals, not with allies, but with the man writing fictional novels about Bangkok's criminal history. A bestseller, popular with university students. The author's name was Dr. Natapon, a historian, once respected, now mildly disgraced. Sai Baa asked for him by name. Gam was confused. Why him? Sai Baa smiled. Because the past isn't dangerous until someone rewrites it. They met in a bookstore after hours. Sai Baa didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Dr. Natapon recognized him immediately. Not from photographs, of course, but from a certain absence the real ones never had. The calm, the neutrality, the eerie way he spoke like he'd been practicing silence longer than speech. "You want me to stop writing?" the man asked. Sai Baa shook his head. I want you to write better. Then he passed him a folder. Inside, a timeline, a list of events, a few true names. Not everything. Not enough to expose. Just enough to complicate. Why? Nadapan asked. Why help me tell your story? Sai Baa finished his tea. Because if you can't be invisible, he said, it's better to be a mirror. One mainstream historical fact. In the late 1970s, Thailand's public interest in organized crime peaked with a wave of films, novels, and serialized radio dramas. Many of them were speculative, exaggerated, or deliberately misleading. Many people still think the man behind those stories was a myth. So what do you think? If a ghost helps write his own legend, is he still haunting or simply curating? That night, Sai Baa returned to his apartment for the last time. He stood beneath the fan, listened to it groan, then spin. He lit one candle, tore one envelope, then sat cross-legged on the floor, hands in his lap, and waited. Not for a knock, but for a name to vanish. In 1976, Chiang Rai's mornings came wrapped in mist and rooster calls, the kind that arrived not as noise but as breath. Slow, rhythmic, and almost reverent. The city was far enough from Bangkok to feel forgotten, yet close enough to host secrets that didn't belong anywhere else. Sai Baa checked into the Siren Hotel under a false name, Mr. Fongchai. He carried no bags, only a matchbox tucked into the pocket of his jacket. Inside the matchbox, a phone number, half a matchstick, and a lock of hair from someone who hadn't been seen since the early 70s. The room overlooked the Kok River. From his window, Sai Baa watched a fisherman untangle nets beside an old wooden pier. He wasn't there for the view. Chiang Rai had become a nerve ending in his network. It was where old favors came to ripen, where young men were tested, and where whispers were left in baskets of longan fruit at the market. More importantly, it was a way station, just close enough to the Golden Triangle to monitor movement, just far enough to keep eyes off the road. That week, a new shipment was scheduled to arrive, not heroin this time, but people. 3 young couriers, barely out of their teens, being tested for higher responsibilities. They'd carry documents, hide them in books, memorize faces. If they passed this run, they'd graduate from errand boys to shadows. If they failed, they'd simply disappear back into the rice paddies and never hear Sai Baa's name again. He was there to watch, not openly, of course. He sat in a noodle shop across the street from the post office, sipping broth as the boys approached a man with a limp and passed him a copy of a Thai comic book. Inside, the last 3 pages had been swapped with carbon paper, a receipt of payments, aliases, routes. Useless to anyone who hadn't memorized the ciphers from the pink envelopes. Sai Baa watched the handoff. Smooth. The boys walked on without looking back. One of them, slight, barefoot, scar on his chin, glanced up at Sai Baa's table as he passed. Their eyes met. No recognition, but the moment stuck. Later that day, the boy vanished. Not arrested, not killed, just gone. His 2 companions made it to the next town, where they were told the truth. The 3rd boy was never meant to finish the run. His job was to follow them, quietly, and report back if either of them hesitated. A test within a test. Sai Baa's network didn't recruit for bravery. It recruited for memory under pressure. That night, he visited an old acquaintance, a Shan militia leader, now retired, who ran a small textile factory outside town. They sat on wooden chairs in a garden of faded marigolds and talked of opium, betrayal, and whether ghosts aged. The man poured Sai Baa a shot of homemade rice whiskey and asked, "You ever regret any of it?" Sai Baa sipped. "No, but sometimes I remember the parts I didn't choose." The man nodded. "That's not regret, that's the echo." One mainstream historical fact. After the Vietnam War, Thailand's northern provinces became increasingly important in managing refugee flows and underground traffic, both of which offered cover for ongoing heroin movement. Intelligence networks blurred into organized crime, and the lines between official and unofficial grew intentionally vague. Many people still think that Chiang Rai was just a quiet northern outpost, but in truth, it was a rotating door of supply, strategy, and storytelling. So what do you think? If a city forgets the role it played in a crime, is it innocent or simply well-trained? That same week, a body was found in the river. Young, male, no ID, no wounds, only a note sewn into his pant leg. 6 digits. A scent strip. Jasmine. The local police shrugged. Suicide, maybe? Or a migrant lost in the current. No one called Bangkok. No one traced the numbers. But Sai Baa read the report and smiled because it meant the boy with the scar had passed. He had done what was required. He had followed, watched, reported. And then, when given the signal, he had removed himself from the map. Not death, disappearance as graduation, the final test. And now that boy had no name, only a number and a new route to walk. Back at the Siren Hotel, Sai Baa lit a mosquito coil and stared at the ceiling. The fan squeaked faintly, as if trying to remember an old rhythm. Below the bed, hidden in a loose floorboard, was a small tin. Inside, a photograph of 3 monks, a cassette labeled Prayer Night 1, and a small vial of perfume with a label so faded only he would know what it once said. He would leave it behind, let someone find it in 20 years, let them wonder if it meant anything, or if it was just a whisper that forgot where it came from. He checked out before dawn, left the key hanging on the doorknob, and walked into the fog. Steps light, eyes forward. The road behind him, already swallowed by morning. The wedding was held on a Thursday, not for religious reasons or superstitions, but because Thursdays, Sai Baa once said, were the day people made decisions they wouldn't regret until Monday. It took place in a garden behind a mid-tier hotel on the outskirts of Bangkok. Plastic chairs, white tablecloths, fake orchids. A jazz trio played from under a tent, and the bride wore pale gold silk with her hair braided in a style 2 decades out of fashion. She smiled too much. The groom, a mid-ranking official from the Department of Trade, smiled too little. Sai Baa was not on the guest list. He stood at the edge of the garden, beside a decorative koi pond, holding a cigarette he never lit. He wasn't watching the ceremony. He was watching the kitchen, because behind the wedding, beneath the celebration, a deal was unfolding. 5 crates labeled as imported wine had been wheeled into the kitchen that morning. Inside, nothing liquid, only tightly wrapped heroin bricks hidden inside hollowed glass bottles, sealed with corks, lacquered to glisten like Cabernet. It was clever, but not too clever, just believable enough. The bride's uncle, head of port inspections at Liam Chabang, had arranged the drop. A favor to Sai Baa in return for one that dated back to 1969, when a woman named Molly, then 16 and pregnant, boarded a night train out of town with a ticket that no one remembered issuing. She now stood beside the wedding cake, laughing. Sai Baa watched her laugh. He remembered the way she used to stare out train windows like they owed her an explanation. The crates passed inspection the next morning. No questions asked. The wedding had done its job. That's how it worked in Bangkok. Some people got married. Others used the opportunity to move history across the river. A mainstream historical fact. By the mid-1970s, heroin from Southeast Asia was entering global markets through a wide range of disguises. Paint cans, fish sauce, religious icons, and yes, wine bottles. Customs officials were overworked, underpaid, and easily overwhelmed. Perfect conditions for a fixer who understood where pressure wasn't being applied. Sai Baa returned to his apartment quietly that evening. The fan was still broken. A blade hung limp like a drooping petal. He made no move to fix it. He simply lit incense, poured tea, and opened a small wooden box that held a deck of playing cards. Each card had a name, not of enemies, not even of allies, just people who had once said yes. He flipped through them like an old priest counting prayers. Gam entered a few minutes later. "It's done," he said. "They're already out of the port." Sai Baa nodded. "Who caught the bouquet?" Gam grinned. "No one. It landed in the cake." "Appropriate," Sai Baa said. They both laughed softly. Then Gam grew serious. "There's something else. A name's come up again. The girl." Sai Baa looked up. "Which girl?" "The general's niece, Siren." "Ah, that name. That shadow." She hadn't been seen since the evening of the fire at the bell tower, nearly a year ago. Some believed she'd left the country. Others whispered she was working as a lawyer in Singapore. A few said she'd gone underground, gathering names like Sai Baa once did. Now it seemed she was in Bangkok again, and she wasn't being quiet. Gam placed a thin file on the table. Inside, surveillance photos, grainy, black and white. Siren, speaking with a man outside a radio station. Not her usual circle, not politics. This man was old school, military connections, ex-intelligence, the kind who used to chase Sai Baa across the alleys before realizing it was better to trade favors than bullets. Sai Baa tapped the file. "She's not trying to expose me," he said. "She's trying to replace me." Gam didn't respond. They both knew it was possible. After all, Siren had learned from the best. And she hadn't forgotten the gift Sai Baa once gave her. A jade bracelet hidden in a bag of rice. A promise with no strings. Or so it seemed. But nothing in Sai Baa's world was ever truly stringless. He would wait. He always did. Let the city shift. Let the players move. Let the tea cool before pouring the next cup. Outside, the rain began again. Soft, but persistent. The kind that sank slowly into the earth and didn't stop for hours. Sai Baa watched it from the window. He didn't feel threatened. He felt rehearsed. Many people still think his genius was strategy. But no. It was pacing. So what do you think? When the storm arrives, is it smarter to run or to already be under the roof listening? Back at the wedding, hours after the guests had left, the koi pond overflowed. A gardener, sweeping leaves, found something caught in the reeds. A single playing card, the queen of clubs. Someone had folded her down the middle and left her to float. In a smoky back room near Hua Lamphong Station, a tape recorder clicked. The man operating it wore thick glasses and a shirt 2 sizes too large, like he had borrowed the body of someone bolder. His name was Chrysorn, an archivist, a ghost catcher, as Sai Baa once called him. A man obsessed with documenting what no one else dared to write down. And tonight, he was playing a recording he had no business having. The voice on the tape was low, deliberate, unmistakable. Siren, Jew, he didn't vanish. He thinned, like smoke, like memory. But the lines are still there, on shipping logs, on temple records, on faces that flinch when they hear fans creak too loud. The tape hissed, then her voice again. "I'm not chasing him to expose him. I'm tracing the echo. Because if you want to know where Bangkok's rot begins, you start at the place where the paper trail burns." Chrysorn paused the tape. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He simply exhaled, deep, heavy, uncertain. He knew what this meant. If he had it, others would soon have it too. He made a decision. He packed the tape, the transcripts, and 3 film negatives into a folder and slipped them inside a hollowed-out Thai dictionary. Then he mailed it. Not to a paper, not to a station, to a tea house. Specifically, to the one with a loose tile near the 3rd table and a waitress who always wore purple on Tuesdays. Sai Baa received it 2 days later. He opened the package under the dim light of his kitchen. No emotion. No surprise. Only a sip of cold tea and the faint tilt of his head as Siren's voice emerged from the speaker. He let the tape play 3 times, then he turned it off and made a phone call. "Tell Jay I need a lantern. Gam, on the other end, hesitated. What color? Blue, that was all. Blue meant misdirection. It meant we move, and they chased the wrong scent. Within 48 hours, Sai Baa's routes were remapped. The clay Buddha shipments were paused. The warehouse workers rotated. Even the tea house waitstaff shifted their rhythms. New faces at the register, old ones working the kitchens. Siren had drawn blood. She hadn't struck him, but she'd found the rhythm, and that made her dangerous. Still, Sai Baa didn't panic. He wrote a letter, not to Siren, to her mother. It was short, respectful, folded into a handkerchief once gifted at a Lunar New Year dinner long past. The message was simple. Your daughter plays with matches in a city built of rice paper. No threat, just a forecast. The letter was delivered by a boy with a missing front tooth and a basket of mangoes. Siren's mother read it, said nothing, and burned it before the boy even reached the end of the street. That night, Siren received no warning, no call, just silence, which was worse. Much worse. She knew what silence from Sai Baa meant. Meanwhile, in the south, a new player emerged. His name was Chalerm, ex-captain, honorable discharge, now consulting for a shipping conglomerate with 3 fake board members and 1 very real fleet. He approached Sai Baa through the usual channels, cautious, respectful, but not too deferential. He offered access to Gulf routes, oil barrels, and an entire logistics team already on payroll. Sai Baa didn't say yes. He sent Chalerm a single question, written on a torn lottery ticket. What's the difference between a ferry and a ghost ship? Chalerm responded the next morning. A ferry knows it's carrying passengers. That was enough. The partnership began. The barrels were never full of oil. Instead, compressed canvas bags sealed with wax, each containing heroin refined with the new dry glass method, a technique brought in by a Burmese chemist who'd once worked in a Swiss fragrance lab. The powder held scent longer, traveled better, and diluted more smoothly. They tested the method on a route to Dubai, no problems. Then to Marseille, still clean. Then to San Pedro, California. That one came back with news. The buyer had recognized the scent, jasmine, tinged with clove. He asked through coded telex. Is this the old man's line? Sai Baa read the message and smiled. Yes, it was. But the old man was no longer where they thought he was. One mainstream historical fact. As the late 1970s arrived, global heroin markets diversified. Southeast Asia lost some dominance to South America, but its quality remained unmatched. Thai heroin, especially from the Golden Triangle, was still the most trusted by major syndicates across Europe and the US. Many people still think Sai Baa's network died when the city changed. But what they miss is this. He changed first. So what do you think? Can a man become immortal not by staying, but by teaching others how to vanish before they're ever seen? Back in Chinatown, the blue lantern was hung outside the tea house for only one night. By morning it was gone, replaced by a red one, and everyone in the network knew what that meant. We've turned. They're behind. Sai Baa folded the cassette back into its case. He placed it on a shelf beside a fan blade he'd never replaced. The tape would stay there, unlabeled, unplayed, unimportant to anyone who hadn't heard her voice. Then he poured a fresh cup of tea and whispered her name once, not as a threat, not even as a memory, just a reminder that every echo begins as sound, and he had always been very, very good at controlling sound. The apartment above the bicycle repair shop hadn't been used in years. Sai Baa opened the rusted lock with a key that no longer had a home, stepped inside, and exhaled once, slowly. Dust covered everything, the table, the stool, the tea canisters. But the layout hadn't changed. One fan, one window, one wall with a single framed photo of King Rama IX, tilted slightly to the left. He didn't clean. He simply sat. This had once been his first hideout in Bangkok, long before the apothecary room, before the crates and pink envelopes, before the jasmine routes. Back then, he'd used it as a place to listen, not to police radios or port chatter, but to the rhythm of the city itself. When the traffic stopped, when the birds began again, when the clongs shifted like muscle under skin. Now he needed that silence again, because Siren had gone dark. No new photos, no chatter. Not even the ferryman had seen her. And when Bangkok stops talking about someone, it's rarely a good sign. Gam arrived at noon. He didn't knock, just slid the door open and leaned against the frame, holding a paper bag with steamed buns and a folded piece of brown paper. She left something, Gam said. Didn't say where she was going. Just said it wasn't a threat. Sai Baa opened the bag. Inside the folded paper, a list. Names, most familiar, a few unsettling. And then, at the bottom, a line underlined twice. You taught me to vanish. Now I want to know what for. No signature, but it didn't need one. Sai Baa read it twice, then folded it and tucked it into his pocket. He didn't burn it. Not yet. Instead, he asked Gam, "Is the ledger still safe? The original? Yes. No one's been near it." "Move it." Gam hesitated. "To where?" "To a place I'd never go." That was enough. By nightfall, the ledger, a notebook wrapped in monk robes and tucked inside a hollow statue of Vishnu, was on its way to Luang Prabang, carried by a deaf courier who didn't know what he held. Sai Baa returned to his apartment and waited. He no longer played chess, no longer took notes. He simply watched the fan move, slowly, like a tired eye blinking through old thoughts. That night there was a knock at the door. Not Gam, not Siren, just a man in a gray jacket, carrying a briefcase and a cigarette he never lit. He introduced himself as an interpreter for a friend. Sai Baa gestured for him to sit. They spoke quietly for hours. The man asked about routes, not the current ones, but the early ones. How Sai Baa had mapped the old forest trails through Chiangdao. How he'd memorized the bends in the Mekong. How he convinced boatmen to carry bricks they never saw and never asked about. Sai Baa didn't answer most questions, but he listened. And then finally the man said, "She doesn't want to replace you. She wants to preserve the design." Sai Baa leaned back. "You don't preserve smoke. You just teach it how to drift." The man nodded. "She said you'd say that." Then he left, and Sai Baa was alone again. He thought of the first envelope he'd ever burned, the one with only numbers, no names, the one that had started all of this. He remembered the feel of it, the way the flame hesitated for just a second before taking, a mainstream historical fact. By the late 1970s, Bangkok's underworld began to evolve. Younger figures emerged, some shaped by the old guard, others desperate to dismantle it. The heroin trade didn't die. It simply morphed, finding new hosts, new faces, new languages to speak in. Many people still think Sai Baa faded quietly into myth, but fading isn't the same as leaving. So what do you think? If you build a network strong enough to survive you, are you gone? Or simply watching from another corner? At dawn, Sai Baa opened the window. The city was quieter than usual. Fewer tuk-tuks, more bicycles. The kind of morning that didn't need anything explained. He brewed tea, and for the first time in months, he wrote something, just a few lines, on paper soft with age. "When I go, it won't be forward, not sideways, just quieter than the fan." He folded the note and slid it behind the photograph on the wall. Then he finished his tea, didn't clean the cup, didn't lock the door, just walked outside, hat low, steps slow, and disappeared down the alley, one hand in his pocket, touching the paper she'd left behind. The boat moved like a breath along the Chao Phraya. Long, low, silent, except for the occasional creak of wood, remembering how to float. The man at the tiller wore mirrored sunglasses and no expression. Sai Baa sat cross-legged near the bow, a canvas satchel at his side, untouched since departure. It was just past midnight. Bangkok's skyline had softened into silhouettes, cranes frozen mid-stride, temples blinking behind haze, towers with half-lit floors and lives within them unaware that something old was slipping past unnoticed. This wasn't a shipment run. It wasn't an escape either. It was a circuit. An old path he hadn't taken in nearly 20 years, tracing old entry points, long buried caches, burned homes turned into condos, the ghost lines of an empire now reduced to shadows and syndicates who didn't know his name. The boat pulled into a small inlet just north of Thonburi. Here, there had once been a safe house behind a sugar warehouse. Now, an empty lot, ringed with faded plastic bags, and a tin shack with a cracked Buddha statue guarding it. Sai Baa stepped onto the dock. No fanfare, no guards, only the river, watching. Inside the shack, he found it as he'd left it, a rusted trunk beneath a false floorboard. Inside, 3 things. A faded ledger, not the one sent away, but its twin. This one bore only dates and symbols, no names. A cassette recorder with a single tape labeled Entry 0 for her, and a sealed envelope with a fingerprint over the flap. He took the tape and placed it in his coat pocket. The envelope he burned. He didn't open it. That was the point. Let it be ash. Let the curiosity feed the next watcher. He spent the night there, listening to the river, letting its rhythm replace his own thoughts. In the morning, a monk passed by with a food pail. Sai Baa greeted him, asked for nothing, said only, "Do you remember when water moved slower?" The monk didn't answer. He only smiled and walked on. That day, across the city, Siren made her move. She didn't arrive with a bang. She didn't give a speech. She simply stepped into a tea house near Victory Monument, handed the cashier a card and said, "I'm taking over the supply chain. You'll adjust." The cashier, barely 20, nodded once and reached under the counter for a folder labeled Sky Routes. Siren took it, placed a small jade bracelet on the counter in return, and left. The network accepted her not because she was feared, but because she understood it. She didn't try to rebuild it. She respected the frame. Back in Thonburi, Sai Baa walked through a small cemetery, not for graves, but for memories. Each stone reminded him of something he'd abandoned. Names, debts, languages no one used anymore. He stopped at a small unmarked marker, bent down, placed the cassette beside it. Not buried, just left. The past didn't need to be hidden. It needed to be placed. One mainstream historical fact. As the 1970s ended, Thailand's role in global heroin trafficking shifted. More scrutiny arrived, but so did more sophistication. The networks adapted, splintering into factions, formalizing routes, turning fixers into logistics managers. The line between criminal and coordinator blurred completely. Many people still think Sai Baa disappeared because he lost, but that's not true. He left because he won, and staying any longer would have ruined the design. So what do you think? When the architect walks away from the house, does it collapse? Or does it finally stand on its own? Siren would never find the tape, not unless she already knew where to look. And if she did, then she was ready. That was his final test. Not a confrontation, a trail, a lesson in restraint. As the sun rose behind him, Sai Baa stepped into a taxi and asked the driver for a temple in Nonthaburi. The driver asked which one. He smiled. Whichever one doesn't ask questions. The driver didn't blink, and the city didn't flinch. Bangkok had absorbed worse. The taxi rolled forward, soft tires against uneven pavement, and Sai Baa closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in stillness. He'd left no empire behind, only echoes. And the echoes were learning how to whisper. The Nonthaburi temple was quiet, not sacred quiet, just the kind of hush that happens when a place has watched too much and learned not to react. Monks moved like shadows between courtyards. Incense burned in steady spirals, and a dog, half blind, lay curled beneath a Bodhi tree, unbothered by the passing of time. Sai Baa arrived before noon. No entourage, no disguise, just a man with slow feet and a folding fan tucked inside his jacket. He wasn't there to pray. He was there to leave. Inside the temple grounds, there was a room, a storage unit converted into a study, filled with old scrolls, broken typewriters, and donations too obscure to display. Few people had the key. Sai Baa did. The monk who greeted him said nothing. He only bowed, handed him a small brass key, and returned to sweeping the walkway. Sai Baa entered alone. The room smelled of ink and sandalwood. Dust sparkled where the light cut through. In the far corner, beneath a shelf of untranslated palm leaf manuscripts, was a sealed clay pot. He knelt beside it, opened it, and removed its only contents. A photo of 3 men standing beside a train. All 3 were younger than. 2 were smiling. 1, Sai Baa, was not. He stared at it for a long time. Then he slid it into the satchel beside him and pulled out something else. A notebook. Not the ledger. This one was different, filled with maps, routes, margins scribbled with tea stains and tiny jokes only he would understand. One simply read, "Avoid ferries after rain. They always talk." It was a journal of mistakes, a breadcrumb trail of every failed deal, every near arrest, every silence misread. He placed it in the clay pot, sealed the lid, and tucked it back under the shelf. Let it be found someday by someone who thought it was a recipe book. Let it confuse them. Let it whisper only if they deserved to hear. Back in the courtyard, a group of school children was visiting. Their teacher explained the mural along the wall. Demons, gods, cycles of suffering and rebirth. One boy pointed at a figure painted with many arms and asked, "Is he a gangster?" The teacher laughed. "No, child, he's a guardian." The boy shrugged. "Same thing, maybe." Sai Baa smiled to himself. Later that day, he sat under the Bodhi tree. The blind dog wandered over and sniffed his knee. Sai Baa reached down and scratched behind its ears. "Do you think they'll remember the story right?" he asked. The dog said nothing, but it didn't walk away. One mainstream historical fact. Many fixers and smugglers from the 1970s disappeared without record, especially those operating in borderless regions like northern Thailand, Laos, and Burma. Some re-emerged as businessmen, others faded into spiritual circles. Some were simply never seen again, surviving only in the footnotes of someone else's biography. Many people still think Sai Baa became a monk. He didn't. He just visited temples like most men his age, quietly, respectfully. Without asking for forgiveness he didn't believe he owed. So what do you think? Is peace something you chase? Or something you remember once you've stopped running? Back in Bangkok, Siren began to rewrite the routes. Not to smuggle more, to stop them. She'd infiltrated the machine not to drive it, but to shut it down, one rusted cog at a time. Some of Sai Baa's old crew resisted. Some vanished. A few joined her because they understood. She wasn't trying to destroy what he built. She was trying to end what had outlived its purpose. Gam? He disappeared too. But one day, a postcard arrived at the tea house. No words, just a photo of a fan. And beneath it, one line. Still turning, Sai Baa watched from a distance, not to interfere, just to see if the whisper held. And it did. People still gathered at the old checkpoints, still traded maps of markets. But the bricks stopped moving. The boats slowed. The silence grew heavier, and with it came something unexpected. Stillness. That evening at the temple, Sai Baa lit a stick of incense. For no one, just the air. And then, as the last light faded, he did something no one expected. He took off his shoes, walked barefoot across the courtyard, and laughed. Not loudly, just once. The kind of laugh that feels like dust shaking loose. The laugh echoes longer in memory than it did in the courtyard. Sai Baa disappears again. Not dramatically, not mythically, just efficiently. A whisper slipping behind a temple wall. A figure stepping off the path and into foliage. No passport, no send-off. Only a kettle left on the stove and a closed window with a single fingerprint on the glass. In Bangkok, The silence he leaves behind begins to take shape. Not emptiness, a vacuum of decision. Some lieutenants try to revive the old roots. A few even contact former clients, trying to resurrect what Sai Baa had let decay. But it doesn't hold. The timing's off. The city's rhythm has changed. And Siren? She doesn't fight them. She simply makes better offers. A shipment of school uniforms instead of bricks. Micro loans instead of bribes. Tea shops that actually serve tea. One by one, the old hands fold into her system. Not out of fear, but because they sense she understands the code. Not the mechanics, the ethics of shadow. There's a difference between a ghost and a grifter, and Siren knows exactly which side she walks. One day, a former customs official receives an envelope. Inside, a single playing card, the queen of clubs, but this one isn't folded. It's pressed flat in wax paper, pristine. A note is attached. We still listen. We just stopped smuggling. It spreads. In Chiang Mai, a restaurant stops laundering. In Narathiwat, a boat route shuts down permanently. In Saigon, someone opens a tiny museum, half fiction, half memory, entirely inspired by whispers of a fixer who never signed his name. Back at the Nantaburi temple, the clay pot vanishes. No break-in, no trace, just gone. The shelf holds only a scrap of paper now. A haiku in Thai. Smoke does not explain why it leaves the fire behind, only how to drift. One mainstream historical fact. In the 1980s, many former narcotics corridors throughout Southeast Asia restructured under pressure from both U.S. DEA initiatives and internal political reform. While trafficking never fully ceased, its old command structures were fractured, replaced by looser, more fragmented rings without iconic leadership. Many people still think the story ends there, with new names, new factions. But what if the real ending happened not in an alley, or a shootout, or a cell? What if the true conclusion was simply a choice, to teach someone how to stop it? So what do you think? Does the architect rest when the last brick is laid? Or only when someone comes along to gently take it apart, far away, maybe in a border town, maybe somewhere without name signs? An old man teaches a boy how to boil tea without burning the bottom of the kettle. He doesn't speak much, but when he does, the boy listens. And someday, maybe, the boy will wonder why the man always sits with his back to the door, and why, on rainy nights, he watches the floor fan like it's telling a story in a language he no longer uses. There's no thunder when a legend retires, only the soft compression of air as one more door closes quietly behind him. In a fishing village west of Hua Hin, a storm gathers. Not a typhoon, just the kind that rattles shutters and silences radios for a few hours. Here, in a low bungalow with corrugated roofing and salt-stained walls, Sai Baa sits on a porch with a radio that no longer picks up signal. Not that it matters. He hasn't listened to the news in years. There are children laughing nearby, unrelated, unbothered. One chases a stray chicken. Another, in a Superman shirt 3 sizes too large, holds a kite, even though there's no wind. The waves slap the shore like hands, remembering how to applaud. Inside, the table is bare. Just one envelope remains, not sealed, already opened once long ago. Inside, the queen of clubs, the real one, the one he never played. He holds it between 2 fingers now, eyes on the sea. Not for memory, for alignment. Even now, Sai Baa's mind draws the shapes of roots, where wind meets tide, where weight slows lift, where movement becomes invisible when expected. A mental habit, a game he no longer plays but still wins, silently. Then the girl arrives, 8 years old, wearing dusty shoes and a backpack stitched with cranes. "Are you the man from the boat?" she asks. Sai Baa doesn't answer. She holds up a thermos. "Grandma said you don't take tea from anyone, but this one's jasmine. She said to say it's yours." He gestures for her to sit. She does. They sip together. Quiet, no ceremony. The sky rolls a low note above them. Then she pulls a notebook from her bag, flips it open, shows him a map. It's poorly drawn. Rivers curve wrong. Towns float where they shouldn't. But one detail is perfect. A tiny fan sketched right in the corner. "I heard a story about you," she says. "Oh?" Sai Baa murmurs. She nods. "You made the city breathe better, even though you never got thanked." He smiles faintly. Maybe that's the point. A breeze picks up, tugging at the edge of the porch. She turns a page. "Can you help me finish this?" He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he folds the Queen of Clubs in half, places it between the pages of her notebook, closes it gently, "Only if you promise not to finish it." She blinks. But why? Because the map's more useful while it's still changing. She thinks for a moment, then grins. "I get it." Sai Baa nods. Not in approval, in understanding. A mainstream historical fact. By the mid-1980s, Thailand's enforcement units, especially the ONCB, Office of the Narcotics Control Board, had gained enough intelligence to cripple most major syndicates operating from within the country. But what couldn't be broken were the skills left behind. How to listen, how to vanish, how to watch the shape of silence. Many people still think Sai Baa's story ends here, but maybe this isn't the ending. Maybe it's a relay. So what do you think? When you teach someone how to see the path beneath the street, does that make you a criminal or a cartographer? The storm arrives. Rain falls heavy but not cruel. The girl leaves. The thermos stays. And inside the bungalow, Sai Baa switches off the fan, not because he's cold, but because even the wind needs rest. He sits in the dark, breathing slowly, listening not to the storm, but to the quiet beneath it. And when morning comes, the sea will erase every footprint. But somewhere, folded inside a child's notebook, is the last move of a man who never wanted to be remembered, just understood. The fan slows now. The city has exhaled. The night is long, and the tale has drawn its final arc, soft, subtle, and without the need for applause. In the quiet that follows, there's no need for names. Only silhouettes, the kind that pass through memory like steam from a kettle, warm and fleeting. Sai Baa's story was never about dominance. It was about control, the kind that knows when to pull back, when to observe, when to vanish entirely so others can rise. You're still here, and that says something. Maybe it means you were listening, not just to the facts, but to the pauses between them. The fan that hummed beneath the words. The room we built together, sentence by sentence, until you could feel the air shift around you. And now, as your eyes grow heavier, and the lights blur into gold behind closed lids, let this be your final image. A quiet tea house with no address, a chair still warm, a record player playing nothing at all, and a man, or perhaps just the idea of him, folding one last note before slipping it into the drawer of a world that no longer needs it. The rain outside softens, the street is empty, and whatever route brought you here, tonight at this hour, just know you're safe now. Let go of the map. Let the night take over. Let the world redraw its outlines while you rest. Sleep easy.